Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be. Hi. Come on, Ruby. Come on. Come on, baby. Come on. Come on. Got the dog. Ruby, say hi. There you go. She's going for a walk. Thought I'd do another quick one because we had some people that wanted to ask some questions that didn't get in. Good afternoon. Hey, Sheila, back again. I'll tell you, you're a glutton for punishment watching me all these hours. Okay, Sheila's always here. I forgot to promote a couple people on the last live. I feel badly because I'm trying to promote some people. So I'll wait for a few more people to come in before I promote. But I don't know about you, but I'm all for letting the world know about the people that I like and that are good. And, even if they watch me a little less, they're getting other good content. That's all that matters. Come on, Ruby. Come on, baby. Come on. Come on. What people do is people around here, I don't know what they eat. They eat like either chicken or something, and they'll throw the bones out on the side of the street. Dogs sometimes can get those in their mouth. They chew on them and they try to swallow it. They can, it just messes them up. So it's hard to have her walk around. Anyhow, hey, thank you very much. Thanks for saying you love me. I'm right back at you. It's amazing when you make connections with people through the internet. These are people you probably would never meet ever in your whole life. So that's the amazing part about being online. The bad part is when people anonymously bash people or get really negative. I hate that part of the internet. People can be really mean to each other, and I say some idiotic things sometimes, but I never try to be mean. Anyway, everybody's different. Okay, real quick though. Come on, get across here. Come on. Anyway, it's actually a little warmer here. It's been cold, but now it's got a little. It's not a warm day, but it's like a lot less cold, which is nice. Anywho, so we have about 200 people in here. Thank you for being here. If you're new, by the way, do me a favor if you don't mind. If you're new and you've never seen my face before, can you type the number 1 in the chat? Because I don't want to go into my background if people have already seen me. And most people here have probably already seen me. Most people follow me regularly. Anybody new here? Okay, King Callboy, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Nice to see you today. I talk a lot about politics, just so you know. If your dog has stomach issues, give him plain pumpkin. Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you. I had no idea. Yeah, again, you learn something every day, usually a lot more than one. Okay, welcome, Marley, Bear, PNW. How you doing? Good to have you here. Thank you. You're new, Thadra and Kellen. How you doing today? So for those of you who are new, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'll be brief for those who don't want to suffer through the 10,000th time I've done this. My name is Chip. Nice to meet you. I've been online for about 3.5 months. I'm an Army veteran. Some people have said that makes me a military expert. I'm not an expert at anything. I'm just somebody who tries to absorb it. So I talk about geopolitics a lot. I'm sort of a sponge for information, and then I try to make sense of it and talk about it in a way that's sort of objective. That's sort of my shtick. And just for those who don't know, I learned about the Israel-Palestine conflict back in 1989. And that was, 34 years ago or 35, whatever it is. So it's been a while. And, like most Americans at the time, I didn't know much about it. And so when I did learn about it, I was really confused because I had no idea how marginalized the Palestinian people were. I thought that they were all a bunch of bad people that wanted to attack Israel. That's what I'd been told. And so I came to see a whole different version of the story. And it upset me, quite frankly, and it felt really unfair what was happening to these people. And, I was born in the same year that the 1967 Six-Day War took place. And, the more I went back in history and searched this out, I was like, this is really, really bad. And unfortunately, for the years that I've been keeping an eye on it, and I've done a lot of research, read a lot of books, and of course, with the internet, I've just watched tons and tons of video lectures and debates and this kind of stuff. And it just gets worse and worse for Palestinians. It's never gotten better. And the harder they try to push for peaceful resolution, the worse it gets. The deals they get offered are crap. They can't have their own autonomy. Israel wants to control everything. And granted, I'm for security for any people. I don't want people getting harmed. So I think there's some reasonable security, but you can't control somebody else indefinitely, right? So I've been somebody I follow a lot of other stuff. People always say, why do you always follow this so much? Why don't you talk about, the Congo? Or why don't you talk about Ukraine? I do talk about those things. If you go back and look at my videos through my history, like I said, I started, I think 2 days after October 7th. October 9th was my first day doing this. I was on Twitter before that. But I like to talk about all sorts of geopolitics. We talked earlier today about the race. People said they want Trump and other people want Biden. We got into what I call retail politics. Talked about that for about an hour. So it's interesting to talk about. It's more of a pageant, in my opinion, but it's an interesting pageant to cover. And what's that guy's name on MSNBC? He's like the only guy on television I actually like. He's the guy that rolls his sleeves up and he always points to the board and looks at all the different maps and stuff. He's good, but the rest of the people are a joke, in my opinion. Anyway, yeah, so we had a pretty long life today. It was fun. We talked about a lot of issues, as always. But maybe today we can just take some audience questions because I would like to see what's on people's minds, and maybe we can even have some guests if they want. Now, I am on my cell, so I don't know how reliable it's going to be, but we'll do our best. Got my phone nice and charged up, getting a little exercise in, which feels amazing. And also getting out and getting some fresh air and seeing some other human beings. I spend way too much time by myself, which is really unhealthy. But anyway, so and for those of you who don't know, I've been talking about the Israel-Palestine thing, and I listen. I'm very critical of the Israeli position, and it's not because of Israel or the people. I don't give a shit about that. It's because what's being done. It's the actions, not the actors. And so I always like to say, I just did a video said, what if the script was flipped? Meaning that if it were to be, yeah, we heard about the ceasefire agreement. It's going to be hey, Ruby, come on, put that down. She's picking a plate of food up. Crazy dog. Yeah, it's going to be a 6-week ceasefire, supposedly. There's going to be some exchanges of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. It's going to be a 3-to-1 exchange. Every one Israeli hostage, there'll be 3 Palestinians released. It's going to be for IDF soldiers, if they're being held captive, they're going to give more. But they didn't specify how many Palestinian prisoners. And my damn dog is, hold on, stay. Dog has no idea about traffic. If she ever gets loose, it's over. So yeah, so you don't need to type all caps, user 683, whatever. I'll see it, and so please just do regular text. Yeah, heard about that. I didn't hear it was approved by the H group yet. That was the last piece of the puzzle. What do I think of 8 immigrants beating up the police? I'm against anybody beating up on anybody. This is one of the problems with immigration, both in the United States and Europe. It's a big point of contention. I think if there are people who legitimately are seeking sanctuary from some sort of, repressing situation, or if they're really, really down and out, like anybody else who came to the United States and were looking for a good life, right? That's not necessarily bad. But if you think about if there's a lot of military-aged men just coming in from different places, of course, I'm not against men being, same thing, but it does seem strange that so many are pouring in from so many different countries, and that the Biden administration, and specifically Secretary Mayorkas, who I got to say, I do not like the guy. I think he's an incompetent boob, but that's the guy. And they've just had tons and tons of immigration. And, listen, I have mixed feelings because, like I said, I don't want to be cruel. Everybody came here at some point, usually from Europe. So it's unfair to tell somebody else they can't come. But if you have a situation where you're getting massive numbers of people you don't even screen that well, you never know what's coming in, right? And some could possibly be people that are troublesome. Most probably aren't. But the weird thing, I think, is, and I talked about this with somebody yesterday, the fact that there are so many military-age men. Think of that term, military-age men. Okay? What would happen? Again, this is just something to think about. In any country where the people are getting upset, and let's say they gather and they want to, redress of grievances, like our Constitution says, First Amendment. We have the right to gather in public and, redress our grievances with the government. Well, what if that got a little more crazy and people were like really out and about? So the government brings in either the National Guard or even the military, not supposed to, but it could happen, right? So if you have friends and family in the police force, or you have friends and family in the National Guard, which many of us do, they're unlikely to come out and start, XYZ on their neighbors, right? But what if you had people that were indifferent in those positions? If you filled the military with all of these people who want a job and want to survive, and they go into the military, and then when something has to happen, they're much less likely to have those feelings go through them. I don't know if that's playing a role or not. It's just something that's been rolling around in the back of my head, and I just want to share it. I don't know. I don't want to be one of these people that's viewed as a cruel person, because some people, I think, are just only look at it from their point of view. I don't want anybody else here. I'm here. F them. That's not how I think. But obviously, nobody wants to have a family member harmed or hurt by somebody who has a proclivity for doing things that are illegal. Do I take dogs on a walk? I try to get the dog out at least twice a day, sometimes 3. So it's good to get out and walk. I think walking, actually, I used to do a ton of really hardcore exercise. I believe it or not, I used to bench 330 pounds, if you can believe that. at my peak of all my stuff. But I was like 195 pounds, and I was just ripped. And I don't do that anymore. I'm older now. But I like to go for walks and jogs, and I do a little bit of weightlifting, not much. And just try to keep moving, try to stretch more, try to breathe more. Anyway, yeah, I love going out. But listen, usually like to take the dog to out in nature, just some place where we can go and just get away from it all. Just put the phone down and just take it all in, like I should be now. But yeah, I mean, I just did some push-ups, for example. I usually do about 25 or 30 push-ups, and I do them 4 or 5 times a day, and that seems to feel good. I used to do sit-ups and crunches, but I don't really need to do. I think I have too much. My abs are actually too strong, and my glutes are not. There needs to be a balance there for your posture, and I think my glutes are not strong enough. Anyway, you don't need to hear all this crap, but somebody asked. Okay, thank you for being a reassuring constant. Yeah, listen, I like everybody else here. Watching this happen has been surreal because I knew when I saw what happened on 10/7, I started shaking my head. I'm like, oh my God, the response to this is going to be really bad. But never in my wildest nightmares did I think it was going to be this bad. And potentially, if things continue in some form or another, I'm hopeful that with this ceasefire, a ton of aid will pour in, which is, oh my God, is it so needed? The problem is, and I don't know exactly how, I didn't hear about this, are the Israelis still going to be at the border on the Gaza side, screening everything that comes in? And they probably will, which again is a bottleneck, right? And a couple of U.S. senators went down there, Chris Van Hollen and Jeff Merkley, and they said, this is the problem. It's the Israelis slowing things down. That's the problem. So I hope that changes. I was sharing earlier. I saw a video that was just absolutely horrible. It was pouring down rain. It was cold out. And there was this poor, let me let the dog off. Ruby, come here for a sec. We'll put the phone down for 1 second. Hey, Pop. Hey, what's up, girl? Come here, Ruby. Come here. Come here. Come here. Hold on. Okay, there you go. Good girl. Nicely, she can go off leash at this little park, which is good. Anyway, I saw this poor girl in the rain. It was pouring down rain, and she was sort of hunched up, and it was just, she had nowhere to go. She was just sitting there and just suffering. And that just set it off for me. It's just the agony and the grief and just the sheer, unbelievable nature of all this. It's just such a gut punch. And if that's how we feel from here, imagine how you feel actually going through it, and watching. This is the other part that I think people can't quite understand. Yes, it's bad enough to have individuals going on, but imagine if one of your family members right now, just think about, let's say your mom or dad or your brother or sister, they just died suddenly from anything. Think of how traumatic that is to lose a family member who you love dearly. And then add to that just for a second. Imagine just being where you are now. It's just you're going to go through like probably 6 months of just horrible feelings, and then you're going to go through another 3 or 4 years of just trying to adjust. Imagine being in a war zone on top of that with everything in your normal life gone, like none of your clothing, none of your other stuff in your life, like none of your things that make life, a little better. I just can't even imagine what that must be like. And then just your sheer trauma for the kids. And somehow, some way, these people endure. It's amazing to me. Their will is unbreakable, which I think is. There's two things out of this that I think are if there can be anything positive drawn out, because it's so horrible. But the most important thing is the amount of tension this has gotten. The amount of tension this has gotten is unprecedented, which that may have been one of the goals. I don't know. I didn't hear the H group say that. But sometimes these events, as horrible as they can be, no one wants to see anybody die. But they can serve another purpose. And if that was the goal, it achieved that goal. The other thing is the Israelis have lost control of the narrative. They're still doing the same old, but let's face it, most people now see through it. They've kind of woken up. And they also see through the American government's bullshit. I've had so many, Sister Lee, April came on today and said this, like, since October 7th, everything in her life has changed in terms of her awareness. And that's the cool part about this, is that people are waking up from what has been a long slumber, breaking out of the propaganda egg, and like being reborn with this epiphany of like, oh, I see the bullshit now. And I went through mine a long time ago, but everybody goes through it in their own way, and you reach it based on certain circumstances. And then when you see the stuff, it's so easy to recognize once you've broken free. You're like, that's bullshit. You watch the news, you're like, this is just a bunch of garbage. You can just see it. I use that analogy about the old person's house. So if you're in somebody's house who's older, sometimes you come in and it's got this musty sort of unusual smell. It's just, not as fresh as your house. And they live there all the time. They have no clue. They can't. And if you ask your grandpa, hey, grandpa, what's that smell? And if your grandpa was, wouldn't get offended. And he looks at you and he says, what are you talking about? What smell? That's American propaganda. Everybody's in that house. And they don't even know they're in the house. And then somehow, someway, you get shoved out on the back porch, not even knowing there was one. And you get a whiff of fresh air. And then you look back at the house, you come back in, you're like, oh my God, how did I not notice that? It's because it's ubiquitous. And propaganda systems in the United States, Israel, and the Western world are ubiquitous. And that's why they work so well. And it's unfortunate that we're sort of in this permanent state of, being placated by an information management system that's very subtle but very effective. It goes with marketing and sales and American exceptionalism and Western ideology of superiority and all this other bullshit. And when you wake up from it, you're like, damn, no wonder people don't like America. They don't. I think people like Americans, but I think they kind of have a sad realization that most Americans just aren't really that clued in, but they think they are. And so they say a bunch of stuff when they travel, and people just look at them and shake their head like, I hate to say it, usually Americans, this is not to besmirch you if you're in any of these three categories, but the average perception from outside the country is Americans are overweight, they're arrogant, and they're not well informed. And they're usually loud. It's the person who makes the most noise when they travel. So, but not everybody, of course. And one of my missions by doing this is, and I was really reluctant to do it, by the way, for those of you who've never followed me, I've talked about this. I was like so hesitant to get online. I thought that nobody would want to listen and I'd be like a total failure. And I don't know, maybe I got to talk to my therapist about that too, why I would think that. But luckily that didn't happen. Although, unfortunately, when you put yourself out there, you can get attacked and stuff like that. So it's a trade-off, right? But I think the most important thing is to be able to share information and listen. And the other thing I want to say, this is the God honest truth. Never believe anybody. Our job as people is to take something in and then listen. Don't believe me. I'm just a guy. Hopefully, you can double check and verify stuff. And by the way, if I get something wrong and you go research it, tell me. You're not going to offend me. My goal is to try to get to the bottom of stuff, and even if it doesn't serve the narrative that I think is right, it's good to just know the truth. So, by the way, speaking of that, I don't know if you've heard of independent Senate candidate Diane Sayre. She's what's called the LaRouche candidate for the Senate in New York State. And while I'm not a LaRouche supporter per se, if you don't know who Lyndon LaRouche was, he was a prominent political speaker, intellectual slash presidential candidate back in the 80s. And some of his ideas I don't embrace, but I would say that as far as a checkbox of like the top 10 things that matter most to me, and I think others in my sort of class, are checked off. I mean, she's anti-war. She's pro-peace. She's definitely pro-Palestine. She's against the banking system being the way it is with all these rich people basically running the show. And she wants to make something that's more egalitarian for the people. I think those are really important boxes to check, right? So I support her candidacy. Now, they want to build like this. This is the goal of the whole organization. There's something called the Schiller Institute, which is sort of like the center place for the LaRouche movement. And, listen, they have their own ideas, and that's fine. And I disagree because of ecological reasons. They have much broader concepts of development, and that development is the path to peace and prosperity. I don't doubt that. I just think running roughshod across the earth is not the greatest of ideas. That's just me. I would like to see less of us in terms of new humans being created, because I think, like any species, you have an impact. But some people disagree vehemently, and they think that I'm Malthusian for saying that. I'm not looking for people now to die. Some people have these different conspiracies. It's not about that. It's like anything. It's like the impact, just like the impact of 1948 on Palestinians. I don't want negative impacts. So it all goes along the same line of thinking. But it could be that the earth can sustain many more of us. I don't know for sure. But most of the scientists that I follow who don't get paid off by anybody, they're just trying to analyze it. They think differently. They think that we're already at a point where it's troublesome. But who knows? I mean, the Earth could be able to sustain us for much longer, maybe 10 billion and a lot more. I don't know. But as I look around, I don't think we were meant to live this way, quite frankly. And trust me, I like being on a cell phone. I like heat. I like running, all those things. But not if it's going to have to be the expense of the third and fourth generation from now. They're going to be living in, a much different thing. That doesn't sound fair or good. But, listen, like Joe Rogan said that he goes, I'm team human is what Joe Rogan said. I'm team life is what I am. I like human beings. I like squirrels. I like ducks. I like cows, pigs, sheep. I like snakes. Even if they want to get me, I like them. I don't really like mosquitoes too much. I got to say that. There's when they're biting me. But I'm the kind of person that if an insect is on the wall of my house, I just let it be. Some people can't stand mice or spiders, or it doesn't bother me a bit. They have to live too. Good for them. Now, I did have one situation where I had a bunch of ants that were literally in all my food. I had to I did as careful as I could get them outdoors without, but some unfortunately had to go. But somebody says, you loon, Yeah, I mean, listen, we're all wired differently, right? I don't know why I have that. I guess I'm more probably what you described, like an indigenous, North American native type of mentality, where I see everything as a part of, not human beings, quote, on top of, or this dominant thing. And yeah, we have the ability to control stuff at a certain level, which is a gift. In working together, we're dominating the planet and every other species. But I don't really see us as dominant, even though we're dominating, because I think what's going to happen is human beings are going to learn a very difficult lesson. And that is that I think somebody said it when nature bats last, right? And we think we can just figure it all out, right? We're just going to go, 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 and we'll just figure it out. Like technology will save our ass, right? And here's what I would say: not very likely. We're not going to be. By the way, just to let you know, I don't believe we went to the moon. Not that I'm some loon. There's certain things that are physical realities that don't allow for that kind of travel. And I think it was all pretty much a Cold War ruse. You probably think I'm really crazy for saying that, but here's one piece of evidence for that. Just by the way, NASA claims now, this is no joke. They claim that they lost the technology that would allow them to do it again. Let me repeat that. NASA says publicly that they lost the technology that would allow them to rebuild a lunar mission. Now, do you believe that for a second? Wait a sec. How can you lose? You're an organization that builds on itself in terms of capability. How do you lose the technology? There's a whole. I could do a whole 2 hours on just that issue. I don't want to get into that. It's kind of like, people think you're really nuts. I'm not a flat earther. Don't get me wrong on that. But I question things, and I think we should. And that one is worthy of just like the assassination of John F. Kennedy is worthy of, just like 9/11, just like 10/7, just like any of these things are worthy of conversation, no matter how much it might upset people. So somebody says it's just the Saturn V rocket, and that statement is misleading. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I've really studied that issue a lot, and I'm not an expert on space travel by any means. I took a bunch of astrophysics classes in college that I thought were fascinating. It's a lot of math, but there are reasons. And the other thing is, this whole idea of interstellar travel, like Elon Musk has this vision of perhaps colonizing Mars. Uh, as much as the dirt beneath your feet is part of this earth, and there's gravity, and there's other creatures like us, we are part of this planet. And we are only part of this planet. We will never be part of another space, either traveling or on something else. Trust me, never going to happen. Because we are built based on the characteristics of this place. There's a certain gravity, there's a certain natural rhythm, there's a certain standard of life. It only exists on this particular planet at this point in our knowledge. This is like the sweet spot for our type of being. And so therefore, if those who have aspirations for the future that think we're going to be this interplanet, drop it. Drop it. This is our home, and we got to figure out a way not to fuck it up. And that's the problem with what I have about, I love being in modern life. It's cool as hell. But the question is, was any being meant to be like this? That's a fair question to ask, right? Was the stuff that got discovered under the ground, that liquid we call oil, was that really meant to be used in this way? We discovered how to harness fire. We discovered how to domesticate plants and animals. Hey, baby. How you doing, doggy? Hey, what's up? Want to say hi to everybody? There we go. A lot of nice dogs out here. Yeah, I mean, and we also figured out how to domesticate plants and animals, and then we found fossil fuels. That's been our progression and explosion as a species. And those characteristics have taken us to where we are now. And then where do we go with this, right? And here's the question to ask you, just one question. Think of this point of view. Let's say, for example, we have 4 or 5 generations that get to enjoy the benefits of this industrial system we have, maybe 6 or 7. And then the next 30 or 40 generations have to deal with the negative outcomes of it. Is that really a good thing to do? I mean, it's kind of selfish, right? Now, listen, none of us are responsible. I didn't like vote for this stuff. I was born in 1967, and I just kind of get swept into this, right? And if you live in America, you consume a lot. Just it's incidental to the way of life, and it doesn't exist in other places. Like when North America wasn't colonized by the Europeans, they didn't live this way. They lived in a very sustainable way, very, very bare bones. They would use what they needed. They would get by. It was a much tougher life, but maybe better. I don't know if our rhythm was meant to be so separated from nature as it is now. And my take is probably not. And I think if most of us were more immersed in nature and living in that style of living, we'd probably be much happier and much more fulfilled, even though it's much, much simpler. But sometimes simple is great. You ever had a moment where you're working on, maybe you're raking leaves or something, you kind of get outside your head for a minute, like that massive amount of presence is where we need to be with Earth around us, I believe. And so therefore, And by the way, some people also believe, and I don't know for sure on this. Joe, hold on. The other thing I want to talk about is that some people say that, like the pyramids, for example, how did they come to be? Some of the stones and some of the stuff that built those, who the hell knows, right? And some people make the argument that there are longer holding species that were here before that did some things and I don't even know how we evolved, right? There's a lot of conjecture about that. So there's just some stuff we don't know, like how did the universe start, for God's sakes, right? I mean, what is that even about? How can there be a starting point, which we think of birth and death because we think in a fixed amount of time? But there may just be a continuum that's beyond our ability to understand. I don't know. I have no. I don't stay up late thinking about it, but I have no clue. Anyway, we're getting way off. I'm getting way off into the weeds again. It's this kind of stuff. But I find these kind of conversations interesting. And interestingly enough, and this is probably going to be seem disrespectful. I do not mean it that way. But it seems like the interpretation of different religious texts that have been around now for over the last couple, 3,000 years, whatever it's been. Because remember, humans have been around for probably 200,000 or 300,000 years in our current form, hominids and then Homo sapien. And I don't know what they had as far as belief systems way back 20, 30, 40,000 years ago and before. They're probably just too busy surviving to think about this stuff. But modern man or woman, so to speak, has interpreted things in different books that are written down, and they have different formulative belief systems. And I can't say for sure. I have no reason to doubt some of the interpretations, but I have no way to affirm them either. And I know a lot of people think that I should step into a certain space with regards to either checking out the Quran or whichever other ones you might think are the way to go. And, I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of focus and continuity, so it probably can't be nothing. But other people argue that don't believe in it at all, say that it's just an explanation for trying to explain the unexplainable and then try to have some guidelines for living to control people. I've heard that argument made. I come down on the side of being confused. I don't know how you feel. I was raised in a Christian household as a kid, and I tried like heck. I really did try to. I used to pray a lot when I was a kid and try to engage with it, and I just got to a point where I felt like I was being a complete phony. And ever since then, I've tried several times to get back into it, and it just has never. It's like a puzzle piece a square that wouldn't make it into a circle, I guess. And so I don't know. I have no reason to deny it, but I've never been able to connect with it. And as an evidentiary thinker, I have zero evidence to back it up, obviously, because it's faith, right? And faith requires a suspension of evidence to believe in something. And so the one thing I have noticed is, though, the people that do embrace their faith, for the most part that I've seen, that are really sincere, they have this sort of way of being that's much more sort of calm and reassured and sort of just much more at peace. And I really envy that, whatever that is. But I've not been able to get to it. So I don't know. Maybe the path that I traverse from here until whatever will include that, and maybe some people can share their experiences. It'd be a great time. It would be a great panel to have one night. Is people come on and talk about their faith. Maybe we can get somebody who believes in Hinduism, maybe somebody who believes in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and just have a talk. Just literally talk as in a friendly way about how you came to believe what you believe, what it means to your life. I'd love to listen to that. So if somebody would like to do that, you can contact me on my email, which is just chipbarnesonline@gmail.com. And I think better understanding each other from whatever vantage point is all about making things work better. And I'm always up for learning more about somebody else and what they believe because I think that's really interesting. And hopefully, if we can better understand each other, we can get along better, right? And, everybody is not their best sometimes. I've definitely exhibited that, and I feel badly when I do things like that. So I think it's ignorance that causes idiotic things, right? And so it's all about bridging gaps and not having ignorance. Uh, yeah, Thomas, I've talked about that at length, just so you know, and I appreciate your comment. But yes, I've addressed it. No, I've not done anything to that extent. I appreciate you asking the question, though. Uh, sorry, I've got a little thing up here that's coming. There we go. Yeah, no problem, Thomas. So thank you for being here. I appreciate you listening in. Yeah, so I think it'd be interesting, and maybe we could even do it on a longer format because here, it, if we have certain conversations here, it may cause something to get triggered. I don't want to do that because who knows. So maybe we can do it on a YouTube live or a Rumble live or maybe even like a Zoom call or whatever that may be. I may have to upgrade to the paid version because they cut you off, I think, at 40 minutes, and we probably need to have at least a couple hours. And then what we also, without it being mean spirited, we could literally have a debate as to why someone thinks that their approach is maybe different or better than the other without being, mean or condescending, because it doesn't need to devolve into that. But I just find that kind of stuff interesting. I hope let me put my okay. Someone's in. Welcome, James. If James comes in, sometimes these things will time out. And by the way, just there he is. Okay, James, how you doing?
Hi, Chip. How are you?
I'm fine. How about you?
I'm good. I've just I lost you for a minute with my volume. Yeah, thanks for letting me join you live. I really appreciate it. I've heard a lot about you, and a lot of people have been saying that I need to follow you and watch you as well, because a lot of what you do is good stuff, and a lot of what you're about is change and improving things. So, for me, that's what I'm about.
Sure. Thank you for the compliment, OG4359. Thank you. I see the comments.
Are you back?
Yeah.
I lost you for a minute. You're frozen.
Yeah. Yeah, we should.
Did you hear
Should
what
be
I said?
good now. Sometimes the signal
Did
might
I
get mixed up.
freeze?
So yes.
Did I
You
freeze, or
said
did
that
you hear
you
what
said
I
that you
said?
like the fact that I'm a force for Trump. I don't know, but if you want to continue, please do.
Yeah. I just think that I think there's so much going on in the world at the moment. Obviously, we've got the situation with Ukraine that's ongoing, and there's a lot more to that than meets the eye. I'm sure you recognise that as well. Then we've got the situation in the Middle East, which is spiralling out of control slowly but surely. And of course, there's the horrendous death toll on the Palestinian people. I mean, when October the 7th happened, Israel
Yeah.
started the conflict on the grounds that it was self-defense. For me, using just basic common sense, take a bit of empathy out of it, take everything else out of it of personal views. If you look at it with just basic common sense, that death toll of 33,000 plus and the amount of children that have died, it's not self-defense.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard people. I've heard people claim. I've heard people claim out of those numbers. And again, I don't have the exact numbers. I've heard people from the Israeli side claim that as many as 9 or 10,000, maybe 12,000 were militants, and therefore the numbers being claimed are way off. I don't know if that number includes militants and civilians, or if it's just civilians. I've not been able to clarify that. If anybody knows, please tell me.
do you know what, Chip? That's the problem, because there's a media blackout, and because, and I'm going to be a bit honest here. Some people might like what I'm going to say, might not. But Israel hasn't exactly been honest about the situation in a lot of areas. So they've said one thing, then they've done another thing, or that
Yeah.
they've blamed Hamas for something when it's blatantly been proved later on that they've done it. So for me, I look at the whole situation. Once you start as a legitimate state, a democracy, with a legitimate army, once you start telling lies and you start getting found out on a regular basis, it's very hard
Yeah.
for people to look at you with real credibility. That's the issue they've got. I mean, if they want any credibility at all, they really need to clear that up, and they need to clear it up rapidly. And I don't think that they can.
Well, just to let you know, I've been watching this thing for a lot of time, a lot of years. And the one thing I've noticed is that the Israelis, unfortunately, and their representatives tend to mislead the public, and that's the nicest way to put it, or outright lie and stage things and try to make things look a certain way. It's almost like they have and by the way, this happened in Ukraine as well. They almost like have a movie
Yeah.
production team, and they also the media worked with it too. Believe it or not, there was CNN was caught staging like a reaction to an attack where they were laying on the ground, and there was a recording of the director telling them what to do when they really weren't in any danger. It made it look like they were under attack by the H group or something like that. So it's widespread. The dishonesty is all over the board. I don't trust anything they say. Unfortunately, I wish I did, because I'd like to say nice things, but the observations over the years has directed me otherwise.
No, yeah, I agree with you, and especially on what you said about Ukraine. There's been a lot of underhandedness there, and they've not been very honest about that situation. Definitely, I mean, everybody just looks at it as It
Yeah.
started when Vladimir Putin invaded eastern Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin's just trying to take the country. Anybody who's done any proper research on it or got any background behind it, knows any knowledge about it, knows that that's complete rubbish. This goes all the way back to when the Berlin Wall came down, and NATO said not one step further east. And of course, NATO and the
You're
US
right.
completely and utterly let the Russians down on that. And I think with Ukraine, it came to a point where Putin, just before the invasion, actually went to NATO and went to the USA and said, "Look, we need to sit down and talk about this." And the US just basically turned around and said, "We've got nothing to say. We'll do what we want." And that was the trigger for the invasion.
Right. Exactly. And by the way,
So
what a lot of people don't know
there's
either is that, again, we can talk about this for a while. Do you know, Mr. Do you know about the role of Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State for Eastern European Affairs? Did you see her role in this?
Yes, I've heard quite a bit because I work a lot with Warren Thornton. I don't know if you know Warren Thornton, and he's very big on all the information about Ukraine. So I get a lot of stuff with him. And yeah, her name's come up quite a few times.
Yeah, she's a
And
long-term member of the permanent establishment. She's one of those neocon types. Let me give people, listen, I'll give you the executive summary of Ukraine just so you know after all the research I've done, it's probably very similar to what James is talking about. And you're probably going to find this contentious, but I'm just going to tell you, I don't believe the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, had much choice than to do what he finally did. In fact, I was surprised he didn't do it much sooner because I thought that the pressure that was being brought to bear by the United States and its allies in Ukraine, vis-a-vis arming them and just pressuring further to the Russian border, was an untenable situation. I mean, just this is the way I like to put it to Americans, okay? Imagine if China had been arming a military group that was very radical in just across the border in Texas, like in Mexico, and they were potentially going to bring in all this equipment, all these soldiers, all this training, and maybe even missile systems that could be armed with either conventional or even worse, warheads. Do you think the United States would stand for 10 seconds of that? We already know from history that when the Russians brought missiles to Cuba, the United States put in a naval blockade under John Kennedy, and it's never ended. That blockade is
yeah,
still in place since 1962. So my question is, it's unreasonable to expect another large power player like Professor John Mearsheimer talks about, that they wouldn't do what's in their security interest. And if a neighboring country that's the only place they've ever been invaded through in their history twice, if there's a foreign adversary that's setting up shop on the border and training somebody to maybe come in, how can you? It'd be irresponsible not to create a buffer. It would be stupid of them not to. And by the way, they waited as long as they could. They tried to work out peace agreements to take the pressure off the people in the east, and it just didn't work. The Ukrainian government kept violating the ceasefires. It's called the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements. You can look it up. They met up in Minsk, Belarus, which is the capital of Belarus to the north, and they just weren't able to get it worked out. And so you have to understand that if you're a foreign leader, you can't just sit on your hands when somebody's threatening the national security of your country indefinitely. And you eventually have to say, and by the way, he gave the Western powers plenty of chances to stop doing what they're doing. He gave them plenty of warnings and was very clear about his red lines. And he's a very straight up guy. He doesn't bullshit. And when the United States basically said, F you, we're going to do it, then he had to step up and do what he did. So I don't blame the guy. I don't like war, but I understand it, again, within the context.
no, you're absolutely right, Chip. I mean, I've heard that the American government is saying that Putin wants to come to the table. I'm reliably informed through Warren that that is not the case, that Putin did want to come to the table last year. He did want to come last summer. And even
Right.
towards the end of last year, he wanted to come to the table. But because the West basically funded that massive counteroffensive and they're
Yep.
still pumping weapons in there, he's not prepared to come to the table now. He is prepared to take all of the eastern parts of Ukraine that he wanted that have declared independence, and he also wants Odessa, and he wants the Crimea, and he wants to keep it. And that will be the only agreement that he'll agree to, along with NATO never being allowed into Ukraine and a
Yeah.
regime change, i.e., Zelensky's out.
Yeah, I think Zelensky has outworn his welcome at this point. He's kind of a useless idiot now. And, they propped him up as long as they could, and they've given all the money's been extinguished now for the most part, other than what's going to be given covertly to them. And again, remember, this is hard to understand, but it's really important to understand. There's a big financial component to these major decisions. So, for example, if there had been a ceasefire, let's say 3 weeks into this, how much money would have taken from the Treasury, put on our credit card, and been laundered through the defense contract and arms industry? Very little. But look what money's come through the process since then. So peace does not pay, unfortunately, for
No,
many industries. And so in this case, how much money got to 100 and what, 130 billion, whatever the number is some absurd number. And a lot of that ended up in Zelensky's pocket. His wife's out shopping at these, $1 trillion jewelry stores in Europe and buying all this. He has, by the way, he has 2 yachts now. 2 yachts he's bought with American
that's
money.
right.
That's unbelievable. Many millions of dollars. I think like a total of $10 million worth of yachts, which is insane. And his
He's
wife,
just bought in Florida.
what's that? What's that?
He's just bought property in Florida as well.
Yeah, he's got properties everywhere. So if he can get out of the country without being unalived, he'll be fine. But who knows? But he's been a useful idiot. By the way, it's not democratic in Ukraine. We've been told all these stories. He shut down all the opposition parties, closed down most of the Christian churches, which is unbelievable. And people are up in arms. He's basically a dictator. They control the press. He basically arrested an American citizen for speaking out against the war, for basically, they called it encouraging Russian aggression. He went to
Yeah.
a prison and he died with lung-related illness that they didn't treat him for. His name was Gonzalo Lira. I had been following him since the beginning of the conflict. And I mean, listen, it was a little irresponsible of him living in Kharkov, or Kharkiv, however you say it, to be talking out against the war. He was arrested once and put out on bail. He's kept talking, was arrested twice, was going to be given a court date for a 9-year prison sentence, and he tried to flee the country. They caught him. He went directly to jail, and then he died like 6 months later, 8 months later, which is a really sad story. But it just goes to show you there's not freedom and democracy in Ukraine. That's total bullshit. And it's one of the most corrupt places on earth. We have the whole situation with President Biden and his son Hunter, and that goes on all over the place in Ukraine. There's all sorts of misdeeds going on there with different people. The more you look at it, the more you just shake your head. Your head almost falls off your shoulder. It's so bad.
No, you're right. And the other thing as well that we've sort of looked at, me and Warren, is the fact that there's chemical testing facilities there that are US owned. So basically, they've got places out there that are testing chemical weapons potentially. Zelensky himself, most people don't realise he wasn't actually voted in. Essentially, the government was overthrown by Western influences, we'll say, and Zelensky was placed in power. There's a lot of talk about whether or not they're a far right government. I would say they are kind of far right. And if you look at the Azov battalion, and Warren's quite rightly pointed this out, if you look at the two emblems crossing over each other on their flag and their badge, it's basically their ex-Waffen SS emblems.
Yep.
So that speaks volumes.
Yep. Well, the word in the United States, and this, by the way, my family told me this when I tried to communicate some of the things we're talking about, it hit a brick wall. And again, they parroted the same U.S. media claim that because Zelensky happens to be Jewish, that how could there be these neo-Yazis in Ukraine? That doesn't make any sense. Well, if you understand the history, look this up. A guy named Stepan, Stepan, Bandera, Bandera. And once you see what the role that guy played, he's considered a hero in the western part of Ukraine. He's a staunch Ukrainian nationalist who was aiding and abetting what happened with the Mustache Crew. And he unalived over 60,000 people during that period, all sorts of different groups, mainly a lot of Jewish people, unfortunately. And he was part of the whole problem. And yet he's revered as a hero because he maintained a pure Ukraine and eliminated the impure, so to speak, his words, not mine. And so there's a whole bunch of disciples of him. And he died back in I think the 50s or late 40s. But anyway, so this whole disciple thing is this group of really hardcore, sort of rabid nationalist Ukrainians that are willing to do anything and everything for their cause, almost like ISIS-esque, ISIS-like mentality, just like maniacal. And they hate the Russians in the East. And if you don't know much about Ukraine, this is the part that was never told. We were told that Ukrainians are Ukrainians. Not so. There's a bunch of people that live in the East that borders Russia. And it makes sense, right? They have a lot of historical and cultural ties to Russia, and they were really part of what was the old Soviet Union. They got independence in 1990 when the Soviet Union fell. But remember, they're considered one people, but they're different people within the regions. The people in the East, or the Donetsk, the Donbass, and Lugansk, they're the eastern part, down in Mariupol and then Crimea. That whole band is very Russian-filled with Russian speakers, and they have an allegiance to Russian culture. They're Ukrainians by passport and by designation, but they're more Russian. It's almost like Mexican Americans would be in the Southwest. They have a whole connection with their culture in Mexico, but they live in the U.S. And what if the people in the Northeast hated Mexicans? and they want to do everything they could to unalive them. And they've been doing it for 8 straight years. And they're
Yeah.
literally lobbing artillery into their residential structures and unaliving people, 14, 15,000 or so over an 8-year period. These are the whack jobs that were in the military, littered, and these rogue units were doing all this crap. And even Zelensky and Poroshenko before him couldn't rein the guy in. They could not rein. I have a video that shows one of these leaders of these rogue units talking to Zelensky, basically telling him to go F himself. Like, if you think you're going to control us, you're out of your mind. Go back to Kiev and shut the F up. And these are the kind of guys that would go after and get your family. Like, these guys are absolutely crazy people. And so therefore,
No.
they were useful in one way. When you want to fight, they're the first to step up and do it. These guys are crazy. They want to go out and get Russians. But when you try to rein them in, they're so crazy you can't stop them. And that was part of the problem. So that's what Putin identified. Listen, when Putin said his mission was, this is what he said when they launched the operation. He said he wanted to de-Yatsify. That's what he's talking about, those folks, and demilitarize. NATO had created a de facto NATO army. If you don't know this, when a country joins NATO, they have to buy all the arms to be interoperable with the NATO units. So if somebody comes to join you, they know what the equipment is. They're trained on the artillery. They're trained on the personnel carrier. They're trained on the tanks. It's all the same stuff. All the comm systems, all the air support, it's all tied together. They got to buy all this stuff. So when the United States goes after a country to join NATO, it's a feeding frenzy for the arms industry. They get to make a huge payday.
Big money.
Huge payday. So most people don't know that. So what the U.S. had been doing, by the way, to be confrontational, they were ramping up. They were pressuring the Russians by arming and increasing and training this military to be NATO-esque. And obviously, if you have someone in your border who's well-trained and can have the other NATO troops pour in, and who wants to have that? We wouldn't want to have that in North Mexico, right? So why would they want to have it on their border? That's the whole point of this whole thing. And that was never represented to the American public. It was just, this guy just went in willy-nilly because he wants to take over Europe and he wants to reestablish the Soviet Union, which is absurdity. And if you look at the territory they're occupying and defending, they're not going further across the Dnieper River, which is the separation barrier from the eastern Donbass and Ukraine proper to the west. And he doesn't want to take over the capital of Kiev or go even further west towards Poland and Lviv. They've stopped. And now they're defending that territory. They've created a buffer so that if there is an attack, they won't go directly onto their border. They have a buffer zone now. And it looks like, because the U.S. is not stopping, they haven't gotten the message yet, and they're continuing to prosecute this war to make money and continue the slaughter of Ukrainians, they're going to keep moving and take an even greater band of territory. And they could, if they take Odessa, they will cut Ukraine off. It'll be a landlocked country, have no ports with which to ship goods unless Russia lets them through. That is a huge blow to NATO if they're able to do that. So we'll see.
They're making, I mean, from what I understand of because Warren, he's ex-military like me, and he's got quite a few contacts out in various embassies and things like that, embassy attaches and things like that. And from the understanding he's got, and he puts the maps up on TikTok, the Russians are making quite significant gains at this moment in time. So their goals are achievable.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you understand the war, this is a typical hardcore ground battle. And if you don't know, there's a thing in our military. There's a thing called field artillery. It's where all the big howitzers and the weapons that fire these big rounds. They're either ground mounted with wheels, or they're actually like tread vehicles with a main gun, a howitzer. And artillery is what this war is being fought with. Artillery and drones. That's it. That's where the upper hand is at. And minefields. And the Russians have established massive defensive minefield positions with drone technology and artillery that you can't get past. The United States could not go in there and fight there with you. There's no country on earth could do it right now. And the Russians have much better trained and field hardened battle soldiers and command systems. Unfortunately, the U.S. knows this. The U.S. is now it cannot do stuff. It just can't impose its will militarily. And we would lose hundreds of thousands of troops if we tried to go in there and fight, which we're not going to do. So what the Russians can do is slowly but surely creep to where they want to be. And therefore they're going to, because they can, and the U.S. can't stop it.
No, you're absolutely right, Chip. I think two things came out of this war which were a shock for NATO. The first thing was that mobile artillery and artillery would be used in such large scales again. They didn't expect that. I think the other thing that was a surprise to them was obviously the hypersonic missiles which Russia used. Now, they used the first missile they used to take out a NATO bunker, I'm led to believe, in northern Ukraine. And they've used the second hypersonic missile to take out, I believe, another bunker. Well, I'm not 100% on the other bunker, but I know the first bunker was taken out. There was apparently a NATO command and control center there, and it got taken out.
Yeah, and if people don't know, this is the big differentiator. This is a big deal, by the way. So Russia has a technology that the United States does not have, at least not in great number. They have a technology that of missiles that fly so fast and can fly through the South Pole. America set up its deterrent systems for protecting against ballistic missiles to the north because they always assumed the Russians would fire them because they only had a certain capability of travel through the north, going across the northern part of the globe. Because Russia has a lot of territory that's very much towards the North Pole, if you don't know how their geography is. So that would provide the shortest path. But now they have hypersonic missiles, which the U.S. air defense systems cannot take down, at least not easily. And they also can send them through the South Pole. They have a greater range now. So the U.S. is very vulnerable. If we had a nuclear war takeoff right now, forget we're gone. We
Oh,
are
we'd be in
gone. There's
trouble.
no
We'd be in
stopping it.
trouble.
No stopping it. No stopping
Yeah,
it. So
we would be in
the
trouble.
U.S. and the U.S. knows this, by the way. So even Putin recently, and this guy is a cold, calculated guy. He is a no BS kind of guy. And he said, listen, he calls us our Western partners. So he tries to be conciliatory, but the U.S. just craps on him at every turn. They treat him with no respect. We have no relationship, by the way, no conversations right now with the Russian leadership, which is really dangerous, by the way. Because we always had, even
Yeah.
under Reagan, when there was this whole Cold War, we had connections. We had a phone line that would talk, and we don't have that anymore. That puts it at a whole new level of danger. And these missiles they have, trust me, if anybody pops off, we're done. This whole
Yeah.
place is going to be a big ball of fire.
No,
It's bad.
Chip, you're
All right, listen,
absolutely
James,
spot on about those missiles.
I have to give somebody else a chance. This has been. Come on back though, if you want to come back on. Come on back. I just give somebody else a chance to
I'll
talk for a
come
bit.
back on. I'm going to go and grab a cup of tea, but I'll jump back on. But I've enjoyed talking to you.
Jolly, yes, sir. Thank you so much. Take care. Yeah, great conversation. We could, yeah, sure thing. We could talk about Ukraine for eons. It's such a fascinating thing, and it's we know the saddest thing is that the Ukrainian citizens, not only their regular army, not only their special forces, which by the way is a very good army and very strong fighters, including those people I mentioned, they're excellent. It's just the Russians have a little bit of an advantage with all the equipment. And by the way, the Iranians, if you don't know, have been supplying the drone technology to Russia, and that's one thing the U.S. is really pissed about. So, and that was a big difference maker, by the way. There's tons of videos floating around of showing these kamikaze. Okay, we have Lena. Lena, what's on your mind?
Hi everyone, peace and blessings to everybody here. It's great to be on here again.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, so I did want to mention something regarding the military technology of the United States versus Iran and Russia and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I was always under the impression that um, this is probably from propaganda and whatnot, but I was always under the impression that Americans had the most advanced military um, and most advanced technology. Um, this is really quite fascinating to me to hear that Russia actually has some more advanced weaponry than the United States. I always thought the Americans had the lead in this. So, I can't hear you.
It's a yeah,
Oh,
it's a big deal. Yeah, it's a really big deal, and it's a big vulnerability, by the way. So it keeps the good thing is it keeps the Americans in check right now. That's the one positive. And by the way, just to let you know, the Iranians also have some missile systems that are pretty damn good too. So
yeah,
I think people like Lindsey Graham, for example, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. If you don't know who he is, he's a total warmonger, always
I know
irresponsibly
him.
calling for the U.S. to destroy stuff. He's a crazy guy. He's a total chicken hawk piece of you know what, and he
Yeah,
calls for the
yeah,
destruction of
he's
Iran.
so
I don't think he understands that if we attack Iran, it is definitely game over for the United States. That'll be the end of our empire, gone forever. We don't have the ability to take out their military. People don't. The arrogance of the U.S. military. We're so overconfident, and we don't have a bad. We have a very good military, by the way, but we don't have the capability to take out a nation state like Iran with all of its backers like China and Russia. That would be crazy.
right,
And this guy's nuts.
right. Yeah, and I mean, I think the one stronghold that the United States military does have is its logistics. The way it's stationed all around the world and has connections all
Exactly.
around the world. I mean, if they wanted to do
Yep.
something, they can get it done like this. So
Yeah, you're
definitely we
right.
can't underestimate the United States military. I think I mean, you would know more about this than I. Um, I've looked into it a little bit myself. way in the past actually considered joining the military. Fun
Oh
fact.
boy, please don't,
Yeah.
please don't.
No, that ship has sailed. I was thinking I was like this close to being in the Air Force. But yeah, that
Yeah.
was
You,
not the move.
nope.
Thank God.
You
I
dodged. You
saved
dodged the bullet.
myself.
You're smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're smart.
But
It's a. By the way, the other thing is the average recruit now for the U.S. They had to change the standards because people who are younger in this country have so many physical challenges because of the food system being so crummy and people just overeating, that they had
right.
to change all the standards for body size and for for even the aptitude test had to be changed. So our
Hmm.
military is not in the greatest state in terms of the new recruits. It's probably its worst state it has been since Vietnam.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
not
it's
great. Not great.
they go after young people, because they don't know better, and then obviously the military offers so many from what it seems like from the outside
Yeah,
benefits, like they pay your college off, which was from the
yeah.
where I was coming from. That was my standpoint. I was like, okay, well, they'll pay for my college. That was my main thing. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to see different places. But then it really came down to, I guess, a moral and ethical conflict for me because, I am Muslim. I am Arab as well. And I know that I wouldn't fit into an environment like that. I knew I would have
Yeah,
issues.
it's tough.
And also I knew like even if I did join, I would probably be the first person to get kicked out because I don't like being told what to do.
Yeah,
So,
me too. I understand.
yeah, but I mean, hey, I know people that have made great careers and great like
Sure.
they made amazing lives out of being in the military and I respect them for that and I don't ever hate
Yeah.
on our troops or I don't think it's
No, of
not
course not.
yeah. um but yeah, that was definitely an interesting period in my life. Thank God I didn't go through with it. You know, I think God works in mysterious ways, and He definitely saved me from going down that route. Um,
Glad to hear it. Well, it can work out if you don't get deployed or you don't get into a bad combat situation. It can be great. I think it's more
yeah,
likely than not that the U.S. is going to be in a combat situation in the very near future. I mean, we're always
yeah,
involved in some stuff clandestinely, like in Syria, but it's inevitable at this point with what I think it's inevitable, unfortunately.
yeah. And in the past years, that was also one thing I had in my mind. I'm like, man, I don't know, if there's gonna be a conflict, and then I get dragged into it, and then it's like my whole conscience, being a Arab Muslim, and that comes first before anything
Yeah,
else. Like, of course, being American, I'm so proud of being American. No, I'm grateful to be born here. I really am. I mean, I didn't have to be born here. I could have been born in Egypt or Syria from my ethnic
sure.
roots. Like,
Yeah.
so I'm definitely grateful to God for that. But as far as being involved in a situation where I would have to be fighting my own people, I mean, I personally, the way I see it, I can't do it. I know there's different ways to look at it, but it's just, yeah, I can't do it. Yeah, I could never do it. And that's what it came down
Well,
to
thank
for
you.
me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing your experience, and I'm glad you're safe and sound. That's good news.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Chip. God bless
Of
you. God
course.
bless this whole
Yeah.
live. And yeah,
Please come back soon. Hope to see you then.
for sure, for sure.
Thank you very much. See you later. Yeah, that was cool. It's good to see somebody who gave it some thought. I did it, just to let you know, I got, when she mentioned college, I had 3 years of my college paid for through my Army service. And that was good because obviously it was maybe I could go to college. But then again, I got deployed to Germany. I wasn't expecting that. I got put into a combat unit. I wasn't expecting that. And then, the dog's freaking out. Come on, girl, come on. And then I went to a war. I mean, I just wasn't expecting any of this stuff. So that's how my life went. And of course, now I have this Gulf War stuff going on, which sucks. But so be it. It is what it is. Okay. We have Truth and Justice, I believe. How are you? Are you there? Did I mute your mic? Let me see if I can unmute your mic. Sorry about that. There you go. You should be good now. Oh, looks like, are they still here? Truth and Justice? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. If you can hear me, I can't hear you. Okay, I'm going to put you back on hold there, and I'll put Alejandro up, and maybe if you can get your mic worked out, maybe you want to drop and come back. Alejandro, the regular, how are you today, Alejandro?
Yeah, I just turned on to your live. What was the topic? Because I was busy with with you, Fractals, the Queen.
We started. Well, I started talking about a number of issues at the beginning. We talked a little bit about some things on the bigger picture, issues like the universe and stuff like that. I like to talk about, and then we talked about Ukraine. We were talking about the Ukraine war and some of the things that led up to it, and why it happened, and why it wasn't the same as the story the Americans were told about.
Yeah, that's when it started. Um, I don't really know, like like Crimea and all those wars. Uh, I don't know what the mentality of the Putin's uh, cabinet. Um, so much land they have, and they want to reclaim more land. I mean, there was kind of it was one of those like, like, why do you need more land? Just let them be. That's I
Well,
think
it's
it
not.
was a big mistake
Well, here's the
of
thing. Just to
just
let you know, you missed a little bit of this. So let me just kind of give you the
yeah.
backstory. So,
But again, I mean, like Ukraine trying to become a NATO, then
yeah,
Putin's thinking, well, if I have NATO in the front of my door, what am I going to do also? So I think NATO, United States, Putin trying to have NATO right on the doorstep of Russia is a bad idea. And then
yep,
funding
I agree.
them. And what happens when Russia funds somebody else, another country, like say in Vietnam, right? China and Vietnam. And
Yep.
it just gets like, here we go again. It's from 65 to 1975. Here we go again. You know,
Yeah,
it's one
I
of
hear you.
those
Yeah, you mentioned
oh moments here. It's history repeating itself 45 years later after the fact of them 45, 50 years later.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, the world keeps doing this stupid stuff, but I would say this. I don't think that Russia, quote, needs more land. I don't think that had anything to do with the decision to go in.
Exactly.
It was a, it was a lot of it was due to the fact that there was a lot of threats and literally bombings happening to people that were living in that region who were Russian speakers, and the Ukrainian armed forces were moving in on that territory, trying to forcibly make them assimilate to the Ukrainian national identity and stuff like that. The reason why Crimea happened, if you don't know, I'll just tell you quickly. There was a change of power, an illegal change of power in 2014. There was a lot of protests going on in what's called the Euromaidan. It's a big square, and it was mounting, putting pressure on the government. The current government at the time was a guy named Viktor Yanukovych, who was very pro. I wouldn't say very pro. He leaned towards working with the Russians instead of working with the EU, and that pissed off the EU and a lot of other people. So they orchestrated what's called a coup d'état. You've heard of that term before, a coup. And that just means a forcible change of power through some sort of means. And what they did was they brought in some of those crazy people I talked about, those
And
neo-Yazs. And
it's like
hold on,
when
hold on,
Fidel
Alejandro, hold on,
Castro took
hold on,
power.
hold on. Hold on, I got to finish the story, and then I'm happy to hear your part. So what happened was they orchestrated a firing of weapons, and they blamed it. I think like 106 people got shot and unalived, and then they blamed it on the sitting president, saying he had cracked down on the protest, which obviously wasn't the case. And the people got so mad based on that report that they tried to go to the guy's house and unalive him. So he escaped by the hair, by the hair of his neck. He got out of the country and fled to Belarus. And so what happened was that's when these different pieces of Western influences came to power. That's what changed all this. So the people of Crimea, who were many were Russian speaking, they identified again more with Russia. They decided to have an immediate referendum, an emergency referendum, and they voted something like 94% to secede from Ukraine and join the Russian Federation. If you don't know, there's a big naval base that's Russian owned called Sevastopol. It's on the southern tip of Crimea, and it's Russia's only warm water port, so they have to keep it for the military. It's like how the U.S. has Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. somehow it's U.S. territory, but it's Cuba. Same thing with the Russian part of Sevastopol. But they formally took over. And then the Russian troops came in to protect the people of Crimea from the neo-Yazis who would have gone in and tried to, do their thing. So anyway, that's the history of it. It wasn't like Russia just came in and stole the place. So, and there's a lot of disputes. Some people say the referendum was a sham. They say the Russians orchestrated it. That's the American perspective. I happen to believe that the people there just didn't want to be a part of this new government because why would they? They had voted for the other guy. Okay, let me finish. Sorry about that. I had to finish the story, Alejandro. Sorry about that, my friend.
Tiri.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you said.
For Papa Bear, the United States, for 888 for convulsion around the world like Netanyahu. Because look, remember when the war started in Ukraine? Now it's just automatically all eyes on Israel, because everything on social media is all about Israel. Palestine doesn't count. They're not humans. They're nothing. And I was wondering how the war is going in Ukraine, whether Zelensky is losing or gaining the upper hand, and is the people are still with them, because there's been a lot of big quantities of loss of life, in Ukraine,
Yeah, big time.
and they're not mentioning nothing about it. I wonder if it's already United States wants to forget about the idea of aiding Zelensky in something that I'm pretty sure I knew from the beginning, and I know it was gonna fail. Somehow, I know that Ukraine was gonna fail at this attempt of breaking free, breaking away from the grip of the Soviet Union. Do you know
Well,
anything
remember
about that?
Well, yeah. Remember, the Soviet Union was dissolved in 1990. So we're talking about the
Yeah,
Russian Federation now, which is
yeah.
where was the center? It was the centerpiece where Moscow was. So here's the thing about Ukraine: the U.S. was using Ukraine as a proxy to try to destabilize the Russian political system to hopefully depose Vladimir Putin. The reason why they wanted Vladimir Putin out was because under the Yeltsin era, when this formerly state-run enterprise were being changed over to private ownership with shares of ownership like the U.S. corporations work, it was a
Okay.
feeding frenzy for Western capital. And so they were in there having their way with whatever they wanted. They were mistreating employees. They were cutting pensions. They were cutting salaries. They were getting rid of health benefits, making the average Russian suffer a lot to make money for these oligarchs. And so Putin put an end to it in 2003. He came in and forcibly made these people do right by the. Imagine an American leader doing that, requiring a company to pay their people well. He basically put his foot down and said, "No mas, you can't keep doing this shit." And so that
Uh-huh.
pissed off a lot of people, and therefore they've hated him ever since. And what they wanted to do is get rid of him, because Yeltsin was perfect. He was a drunk, and all he did was let these people come in and basically guide the process, and they took advantage of him totally because he was a weak leader. So anyway,
Uh,
that's the backstory. And so he also didn't go along with the 2003 Iraq War invasion. That really pissed off the Americans too, because they wanted him. He's a big part of the not the Security Council, so they wanted the guy's approval. They didn't get it. So between
do you
not
think
locking,
that when Europe adopted the euro, and the dollar was not on its greatest peak, that had a lot to do with it, because United States always wanted the control with the all American dollar, and I think that when the euro came on the scene, that changed the tactics of Europe, and especially Russia. You know,
well, I don't see it that way, because
no.
that currency was introduced as a common currency to increase economic development and growth in the EU and have a common currency. I don't think that played a role in the Ukrainian conflict whatsoever.
No. The euro, does it reign in the Arab and Muslim countries also, or the is it
No,
just
it's
the
European Union.
yeah? But the Middle East is not involved with the euro, is it?
No, they
Or
have their own native currencies in each country.
okay, because
Yeah.
I've been watching the dollar and the peso compete, and the peso was almost as equal as the dollar, and United States started their tactics moving on the Mexican peso, trying to stop NAFTA. First of all, that Trumpster started saying that NAFTA wasn't in the best interest of the United States.
Yeah.
When if you get rid of NAFTA, the United States would lose a lot of gain and economic gain from NAFTA because
No, I disagree. I disagree
you
wholeheartedly.
disagree or no?
No, yeah, no, I disagree. The corporations and the investors would lose, but the workers would get a much better deal because what happened under NAFTA was, if you don't know,
Yeah,
tons and tons and tons of American manufacturing moved to Mexico
yeah, and
before it started going to
Honduras, yeah,
China.
yeah, yeah.
So tons of job losses for Americans. Most of Americans' industrial base has been outsourced to countries like Vietnam and China and
Well,
Mexico and
and
elsewhere.
because of the taxes, because they were taxing the companies, the middle companies, and the big corporations. They're like, we're not having it. We're gonna tax you. When the big corporations were not getting, they were getting a tax break. That's what happened. So
Well, remember that. Just remember this. This is one thing to remember. If you look through this, every single decision that gets made at the highest levels of government is not based on what's best for the U.S. citizens. It's what's
no,
best for
no, no. Oh
U.S.
no, we've
industry.
seen that. That's why we got this revolution and going on against our own uh, government, and that's why this is going on because the people are tired of just getting smiled at and letting you know that you're doing good and everything when we're not doing good. I don't know. You mentioned last night that the greatest years were 1970s or 1980s. You mentioned economic
Well, the
wise for the
reason
states or what?
the
Yeah.
reason I mentioned that was back in those days, you could have a single parent, you could have one of the two parents working, and you could pay the bills with your wife staying home and taking care of the kids.
Yeah,
That
yeah. I
that that
remember.
that, that
Yeah.
those days are over now. So now you have to
Well,
have both parents
that's the
working, and they don't.
reason that my father used to pay the bills by himself, and then it's as we were like 16, 17, 18, you needed to work at McDonald's or some uh to help out, and it just started from there, nonstop. I
Well, let's
remember
do this now.
1980s, the mid
Let's
1980s.
let's do this. We have somebody that's been waiting patiently to
Yeah,
talk.
no,
And
no,
so,
no, no. Just
thank you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Good knowledge, good knowledge. Thanks for having me, Chip.
Of
Keep
course.
up the good
Thank
job.
you very much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Yeah, Alejandro always has some interesting additions to the conversation. Okay, we've had somebody waiting. Is it called Truth and Justice? Is this the person that's here? They've been waiting very patiently. Let me see if they want to come on. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Are you there, Truth and Justice? Let me see if I can unmute you there. Are you there or not there? There was somebody that looks like they're here, but I don't hear anybody speaking. Okay, they're staying muted. So let me see if there's any other guests coming. I don't want to keep anybody off if they are. I don't see any other guests here. Nope, no other guests. Okay, let me bring this person down because for some reason they're not coming up. By the way, Truth and Justice, if you can hear me, we can't hear you. And if you want to come back up, you might have to leave TikTok and then come back into the live and then re-request. So that's the deal there. So it says I am not muted. If you want to, I can bring you back up if you want to come up. Just request again. Anyway, so we were talking a lot about Ukraine. Most Americans, unfortunately, we get spoon-fed the same diet of misinformation by our government on so many levels. And if I went out and talked to 100 people right now, and I just took a microphone and a phone, and I just said, "Hey, tell me what you think when I mention this first name," they go, "Okay," and I say Vladimir Putin, and I guarantee the kind of things you're going to hear is dictator, madman, uh, harms his political opponents, locks people up, has people unalived, all that kind of talk. Richest guy in the world, all these he wants to take over the former Soviet Union, all that stuff. That's what you're going to hear. And why is that? Because if you watch Morning Joe or Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly or whoever the hell you watch, that's the shit they keep saying over and over again. So what do you think the public's going to think if every single commentator says the same thing over and over for like 10 years? Yeah, that's what they're going to say. Now go look at a foreign news source like somewhere from Africa or somewhere in in the Far East that's not a NATO or not a Western member country. You're going to hear a much different view of what the hell they see Russia and their leadership. And if you don't know this, Putin has a lot of very good relationships with a lot of other countries. And there's a reason for that. You know why? They have a diplomatic staff that is excellent. Sergei Lavrov, he's the foreign minister. He's amazing. He's a real decent diplomat. He doesn't go around waving his fist at people and threatening them. He's conciliatory. He's open. He's honest. He's genuine. The Americans do all this crazy shit. They threaten people. They try to wave around their power. They tell people we're going to cut you off this, we're going to do that. That doesn't work in terms of diplomacy. That's what they call the rules-based international order, where the Americans make the rules and everyone's got to follow the Americans' orders. That's what that is. And if anybody behaves outside of that, they're considered to be a bad guy. So somebody's asking, so listen, I know this is very, very, very hard to hear because I was too, by the way, just to let you know. We are so conditioned in the United States to think that Putin and China and Russia are arch enemies. And also that the leadership of those countries, especially Russia, are these terrible people that we have to fight against. That is propaganda. If you do enough research, you will find out. And I'm not a Putin puppet. I'm not friends with the guy. I don't know any in Russia. I know one person from America who moved to Russia, but we're not friends. But the bottom line is, he's not the evil guy that's talking about. Now, he does stay in power. He's no cupcake, right? But he's not the guy that we're told at all. Watch what Oliver Stone interviewed the guy for over the course of like 6 years, like for 14 hours worth of interviews. Go watch his speeches. Learn about the guy's life history. You know what he did after he was in the KGB? He was a taxi cab driver in Moscow. The guy drove a damn taxi. He's not some crazy. All the people in our political system are these millionaires and ridiculous wealthy people that just skim money. This guy, if you don't know much about him, he's a very conservative, sort of moderate conservative, very Christian Russian nationalist. And if you don't know what that means that he's 100% in favor of protecting the people and the territory of his country. That's all he thinks about. So what he does is anything that comes up that helps him achieve that, he embraces it. And anything that comes up as a threat to that, he deals with. And so therefore his number one responsibility is protecting his country. He can't just sit back and let another country build up military on your doorstep, unimpeded forever. And you can't allow another country to lie to you repeatedly and get in the way of peace agreements, which is what the U.S. did. And after about 6 or 7 years of trying to negotiate with the Americans on having a ceasefire in Ukraine, he realized these guys don't want peace. It doesn't matter what I do to be conciliatory. These guys just don't want peace. So then he had to go the other way, which is like, hey, I got to start arming myself to get ready for what these people are going to try to do to get closer to my border with missiles and arms, stuff like that. And that's what listen, if you're a responsible leader of a country, how irresponsible would it be of the United States government to allow the Chinese to establish a military base and a huge amount of arms and weapons in Montreal, Canada, like 30 or 40 or 50 miles from the U.S. border? Never going to happen, right? Well, why is it possible that the United States can arm and create a nation that's right next to Russia's border with the same? Why is it that one's a sovereign state and we can't do anything, but Canada, oh no, it can't happen in Canada because that's in our hemisphere. You see the double standard? That's the point I'm trying to make. One of the really good guys to listen to about this, if you want to, there's two people, actually three. Some people don't like the last, but I'm going to say his name because I learned a lot from him. The first one is John Mearsheimer. John Mearsheimer. I'm going to give you four names. John Mearsheimer, Professor John Mearsheimer, University of Chicago. Excellent speaker, very knowledgeable guy. Talks about big power politics. Look him up on YouTube. Mearsheimer, Mearsheimer. Then you can look up Jeffrey Sachs. He's an economist. He's been involved in advising the U.S. for decades, and he's kind of learned the game by seeing. Now he's outspoken about it. So Jeffrey Sachs, Sachs. Scott Ritter is very good. Scott Ritter, Ritter. And then you have Colonel Douglas Macgregor, Macgregor, Macgregor. And the last person I'm going to mention, because he's a knowledgeable guy, like him or hate him, is a guy named Jackson Hinkle. He knows a lot about this stuff. You may not like his style, you may not like his attitude, but he's not stupid. And he knows a lot about this stuff. So those are some of the people that I've watched that I think talk from a standpoint of knowledge and awareness. If you don't agree with one of them, don't watch them. So anyway, thank you for putting that up there, Ikro. Appreciate that. And by the way, the reason why people don't like these people is because they're saying things that don't sound true. They're claiming that they're the propagandists, that they're the Putin puppets. That how can this possibly? How can you guys possibly say that? And a lot of people from Ukraine say the same thing. Listen, I'm not against Ukraine. Don't get me wrong. That's not how I think. I'm thinking like, if I were in Russia's shoes and I was facing this issue, what would I do? Or what would a responsible leader have to do? I'm not for Ukrainians to perish in a conflict. It's been horrible for them. And by the way, they're very good fighters. Oops. But they were put into a no-win situation. They were put into a meat grinder by Zelensky, who was pressured by the U.S. government to do the bidding of the U.S. If you know, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, I don't know if he recently had prostate surgery and he was out of commission for about 2 weeks. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. He used to work for Raytheon, by the way. So that just goes to tell you the revolving door. But what he said was in a public conference one time, a press conference, he said, our goal with respect to Ukraine is to degrade the military capability and readiness of Russia, which means that they're trying to grind down the military to make them more vulnerable in case there's ever going to be more conflict. And they're trying to destabilize the inner politics of Russia so people would turn on him. Because let's face it, when you're at war, what's happening? Your people are dying. So you have your family members coming back in body bags, right? Tens of thousands of Russians have died now. Probably 70 or 80,000. That's a lot of people. So a lot of people get angry and they want the war to stop, right? Rightly so. But that's why there's so much attention on this that way. And listen, look up Oliver Stone, the Putin interviews. It was on Showtime, so it's probably not something to watch for free. I think you can watch like 2 to 5 minutes for free of each interview on YouTube, and then you have to buy the full stuff. I think it's like $14 or something like that. I watched it on Showtime. Excellent. Very well done. And it gives you a really broad insight into how the guy thinks. He's very measured. He's very, very even-keeled. And I think he's respected because of that internationally. You know, guys like Anthony Blinken, he's a joke. You have Sergei Lavrov, who's been doing international diplomacy for almost 35 or 40 years. Anthony Blinken is a chump. He's a chump. He's a little wet behind the ears boy who has no ability to be different. We just have the worst people. I'm telling you, man. We got to get some of our better people in power. This is pretty embarrassing. Anyway, so I'm not optimistic, unfortunately, about the future of our country because it's in the hands of a bunch of second-rate, arrogant, egotistical, basically, I hate to say it, immature brats. We have a president who's basically out to lunch. We have a bunch of people in office, and I'm not going to talk about the dual citizenship stuff, but that's concerning too. And they're just not doing things that are good for the American people, nor have they for decades, but it's at a level now that's absolutely off the chain. And it's unfortunately, you know, to our detriment. So I don't know how you feel, but that's how I feel. I feel less safe now than I've ever felt before in terms of the international landscape. I think it's not looking good, unfortunately. Hey, if you don't mind, do me a favor. I'm going to tell you my schedule real quick. If anybody's in here for the first time, you haven't seen me before, I ask that periodically. Can you type the number 1 in the chat, please? No, I'm not for Trump. Don't get me wrong, get together. I'll explain that in a minute. Is anybody new, though? Number 1, hey, Sam, how you doing? I'm in a little light here, so. Oh, Alejandro, yeah, smart. Heidi, how are you? Nice to see you. Oh, wow, Kathy and Amanda and Lord Sophia, sorry, and Gru, hi. Nice to see everybody for the first time. My name is Chip Barnes. I'm a former Army officer. Hey, how you doing, Fido? And Sky, I can't say that name, sorry. And KKM, how you doing? Tara, nice to see you. Yeah, a lot of new people. I mainly talk about geopolitics. I was in the Army. I was a young Army officer in the first Persian Gulf War way back in 1990. Hey, Tara, nice to see you. And so I talk a lot about politics. I've been talking a lot about the conflict in Israel, between Israel and the H group. And, you know, I've known about the issue since 1989, so I've had a little bit of an insight into it for quite a while. But I mainly talk about this. I talk about other stuff. I do have a pretty broad social media presence, but I'm pretty new. But if you want to check out my other stuff, I have, you know, the same old stuff. I have YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, you know, the whole thing. So if you go to my bio, there's a link that says Linktree, and I'd appreciate it if you can. You know, the reason I ask this is not because I want to have a big followership. I could really care less about that. I just want to stay connected with people. So unfortunately on apps like TikTok and Instagram, sometimes things come up that we just get the boot, and I can't control that. And so I try to be very careful with the content that both myself and my guest in the comments, because you never know what's going to trigger that stuff. But the reason I ask you to follow me elsewhere is so that we can stay connected. So if you can please follow me in one of the other ways, because I've had people say, hey, where'd you go, man? Where'd you go? I didn't go anywhere. I was told to leave. Anyway, I'm coming back inside my building. It's cold out here. Wow. Hey, get your face out of there. My dog's trying to eat somebody's Uber Eats. But yeah, so I talk a lot about geopolitics, and I try to be, my shtick, if you've never seen how I operate, and I think this is kind of what makes people like it, is that I try to be objective and fair, but I try to be straight up. And I'm going to say some things that you probably aren't going to like sometimes, because you've probably been told something different by different sources. And it's going to really be a head scratcher for you, which is understandable, because it was to me when I was going through this process of, sort of molting away from American propaganda. As you get older, you start to see it for what it is. So I'll always give you the skinny, and if I'm wrong about something, I'll always come back and correct it, and hey, I don't care. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But, a lot of people disagree with me, and that's fine. I like having conversations with people that disagree. And I always treat people with respect and dignity, at least in terms of the interview process, because why wouldn't you? But if there's anybody that wants to come up and talk, feel free, even if you disagree. In fact, a lot of people come up and say things that I just didn't know. And so that's always helpful, because I learned something. But that's kind of my way of doing stuff. And, in my videos, I tend to be critical of Israel. And the reason I'm critical of Israel is not because I particularly don't like Israel, but it's because of the power dynamics. And so I always like to say, I just did a video, I think my most recent video says, what if the script was flipped? What if the script was, so what do I mean by that? What if the parties in this current conflict were exactly the opposite? So instead of having Israeli or Jewish people being the ones that are in power, what would you do if it was the exact opposite? What if an Arab state was created and it was Jewish people that were cohabiting in the territory, if they got pushed out with whatever violence and stuff like that? How would it be for them? They would hate that, right? They've had that happen. Jewish people have had that happen to them throughout the centuries, right? Including the horrific nature of what happened in World War II. Not even counting that, they've dealt with a lot of very difficult situations, over expelled from this place and that place. It's horrible. And so what if it happened again? And then what if all the same dynamics played out? You had an Arab state that got this carve out from the British, and other people had to go, and some died, and a lot of them became refugees. Some went down to this little strip. So you have a strip of people who were Jewish. You had a more militant arm of people who wanted to basically say, no, I don't want to deal with this crap. This is unfair. And occasionally they fight back. You can argue about the tactics, but they would go into cafes, they would go into, buses or whatever the hell it was, and they would fight back using tactics that are very controversial, even called T-word. But the big Arab country kept pushing back and further subjecting them to harm, and kept taking more of the territory where they were living. And then this little Gaza Strip, they had some settlements at some point. The Arabs pulled out because it was too much trouble, but then they walled it in because they didn't want to have to deal with the problem. They wanted to keep these people under wraps. What do you think would happen if the last militant action by the Jewish resistance was responded to with such disproportionate force by an Arab nation that was stronger, more well-armed, and backed by the biggest superpower in the history of the world? I would criticize the Arab government. And then what I would do, hey, good, I'm glad you're back. Just one second.
Hello?
I would be critical of the Arab government. I would be critical of the Arab government, and I would be supporting the resistance of the people who are being subjected to harm, which in this case would be the refugees that have been pushed from side to side and further marginalized, right? Even though I don't agree with the tactics, I don't like the idea that the Jewish militants came in and unalived a bunch of Arab civilians and took hostages. I don't like any of that, but I understand it because of the historical nature. So that's what I call flipping the script. People accuse me that I don't like Israel or Jewish. I don't give a shit about any of that. It's about the power dynamics. And so if somebody's being oppressed, like actively being oppressed, then obviously I think if you're a good person, you should stand for who's being oppressed. Now, some people on the Israeli side don't see it that way. They see it as them defending themselves from these bad people. And when something bad happens, it's all their fault. So they have to go in and deal with the problem. That's a way of looking at it. That's a narrative. I just disagree with that narrative. I think that narrative is BS. But I understand the anger and the harm that something like that causes. And it makes a lot of sense. But it's unfair to look at it as a one-off thing. It's like, well, how does it fit into the bigger puzzle, right? So again, if they flip the script, I'd feel the exact same way. I would just be, critical of the other party. So I get shit all the time. Like, why are you so critical, man? That's why. That's why. That's it. That's the only reason. And I've been accused of all sorts of ulterior motives. I had my service record questioned. Anyway, I understand that people got to do what they got to do. One thing I have noticed, will the U.S. strike inside Iran? I doubt it, at least not yet. The reason is because that would just create a hornet's nest. That's just not going to happen quite yet. It could lead up to that, but a lot of other things would probably have to happen first. Now, this is Joe Biden said that there's going to be some kind of a response to the drone attack in Jordan, in the one that's really close to the Syrian border, where 3 American troops got unalived. So there's going to be a response. I don't think they're going to do anything major, because Joe Biden said, after they put like a little asterisk, we don't want to create a regional or global conflict, so we're going to be measured or something like that. So I think that's smart of the Americans to do that. But remember, we did do it before when Soleimani, General Soleimani, was traveling. The Trump administration decided to hit him with a Hellfire missile, his convoy, and he died. So I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do, but hopefully it doesn't do something that's too inflammatory. My guess is it'll be some sort of measured response. Well, no, I think your service record is actually public record, I think. I don't know if it is or not. I have what's called a DD-214. It's the form you're given as you do different jobs in the Army. It's like your resume for the Army. And it includes your service, the entry date, your training programs, the duty stations you serve at, your rank, and it also talks about your exit date if you get discharged. So that's a DD-214. And listen, I got nothing to hide about that. I served for a little under 3 years because they had early outs in the European theater. And I did my duty, and I went to war, and I survived, thank God. I out-processed with an honorable discharge. So that was my U.S. service. I'm not at all some sort of, whatever you want to call it. Well, none of that war hero stuff or Congressional Medal of Honor. But a lot of people do that. Somebody says they responded by bombing Yemen. Has that already happened? I thought that happened because of response to the shipping, but I haven't heard the latest news. No, definitely not a war hero. War heroes are people that either risk their lives to save somebody's life in a dramatic way, or who make some super big difference in some sort of battle or something like that. I was just another guy in the mix of it all, right? Just another person being down there. We're all down there as, brothers and sisters in arms doing our thing. I don't agree with why we were deployed, which is never fun to be in a war where you don't agree with the principle of it. But you can't talk about that in the Army. You can't be talking politics. You're not there to change the politics. You're there to take orders and do stuff. So I learned very quickly I had to keep my mouth shut, which of course I'm not that good at, right? The attack was at an illegal base. Yeah, by the way, well, I understand that, by the way, those of you who don't know, the U.S. has a serious occupation of troops in Syria. Russia's there. A bunch of different jihad groups are there, as well as the Syrian troops and these liberations. It's a mess, man. It's a complete mess. Everybody's vying for power. The U.S. is trying to use these different, believe it or not, this is not unusual. Just like the U.S. funded the Mujahideen to try to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan, and then, of course, that blew back. The U.S. is now funding and arming, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'll use Richard Medhurst's word. If you don't know who Richard Medhurst is, he's an independent journalist. He's Syrian-born, lives in the U.K. Excellent guy. If you're not following Richard Medhurst, I strongly suggest you do. His words are, they have 50 flavors of jihad. And that's his way of saying there's a lot of different, militant / T-word groups that the U.S. is basically sicking on the Syrian government. And they're all kind of playing against each other for power. So if you see what's happening there, it's a very, very complicated situation where the Assad regime is trying to stay in power. The Russians are supporting them. You have U.S. troops that are occupying part of the country, keeping the key oil supplies, so they have to get it from elsewhere. You got these different T groups that are operating there, and you have the U.S. bases. It's a messed up situation. But one of these bases, which is obviously the U.S. is supposed to be occupying, either having bases in Jordan or Syria. This is all part of these, 950 bases the U.S. have. Some of them aren't even officially known about, which is the one that got hit. Clandestine bases, they call those. Yeah, and the U.S. is taking about 70,000 barrels of oil a day out of Syria by truck, has been for forever. It's not a significant portion of the global oil supply, but it's their money. What is a barrel of oil goes for about $74 or whatever it is now. Imagine that times 70,000 a day. That's money, right? And that they're keeping that money away from the government, which is the purpose of it, to starve out. And what they try to do is this is a playbook. It's like you try to just ride out and degrade somebody until they eventually fall. And remember, the people who are really getting harmed there are civilians, right? There's tons of civilian casualties that are caught up, and the place is destroyed, right? So it's really sad because, I didn't know much about Syria until Richard started talking about it, but places like Damascus. These are beautiful cities with amazing history and culture going back forever. And the fact that it's all war torn is really sad. It is sad, but it's all about the power politics, and the U.S. has a hand in everything nowadays. It seems like. It's like, what the hell are we in Syria for, man? Like, what the hell? Anyway, is this Truth and Are they here? I muted you. I'm sorry, and I almost forgot about you. I apologize. Are you there?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry about the wait. I'm so
No,
sorry.
that's no problem. No problem. I really enjoy your content. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on can the US actually really stop what's going on in Gaza now at the minute? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, we just heard that there's potentially going to be a ceasefire, which will be wonderful. And as far as long term goes, it's really up to the Israelis. But if this 6 week ceasefire could turn into something
Sorry,
more,
can I stop you there? Sorry, if you don't mind. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. But do you reckon if the US stopped supplying arms to Israel, this would have stopped a long time ago? A better question.
probably. I don't know how much armament they had stored up, but I know that a lot of the
But all
BO
US
and BS that have
provided.
been,
All US provided, though,
yeah,
yeah.
they didn't have a stock of that, so they needed that. So yeah, I think the answer is it wouldn't have been as intense. I think there still would
It
have been
wouldn't have
military
happened at
activity.
all, I would say. I'd say all Israeli arms are US provided.
Well, you asked me a question. I'm trying to give you an
Sorry,
answer.
man.
So
Sorry, go on. Sorry.
no, it's
Apologies.
okay. I mean, I'm happy to hear your view as well. Here's what I think would have happened differently. I think that the Israelis have some military capability, but not enough to sustain a lengthy battle, especially from the air, but even on the ground. So they need U.S. money, and they're also struggling right now for their money. Their economy's being affected big time by this. So with everybody, they don't have that big. It's not that big of a country. The U.S. is a huge country. Israel's not that big in terms of people.
All right, another question, a better question is, would this war, supposed war, happen at all without US support?
I don't think Israel would be where it is today at all without U.S. support.
No. I agree. I'm a European, I'm Irish. It fathums me the support the US has for what's going on in the world at the moment. I like America. I really do, but it's crazy to think what's going on now. A country for the liberation of the free, and there's
Yeah.
families being decimated by US bombs. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I did an interview with a Turkish TV station about this very issue, and I just said it makes me feel ashamed and disgusted that I live in a country that's providing the money from our taxes or our credit card, if it were, to pay for everything, and we're harming people, we're destroying the place, and it's all being done with military and political cover by our country, and it's completely unnecessary and it's shameful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It makes me ashamed to be from the West, or be a supporter of the US. It really makes me, as an Irishman, really makes me to
Yeah.
be ashamed of association with America of what's going on over there, because it is all US money. That is the thing. It's US money. That's what I say. It's US money. It's US arms.
Yeah. Yep, it really is. And a lot of people are wondering, and I do too. I'm not sure exactly where the motives lie, but remember that in the Biden administration, this is just factual. They have a lot of folks that have dual citizenship with Israel. And we have a lot of people in our country that are very loyal to Israel politically and from a financial standpoint within industry and stuff. And I'm not making any broad sweeping claims. I'm just saying that that does exist. And you have to wonder what part of that motivates the policy versus just looking out for U.S. interests.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would say, the only thing that changes is public opinion. I mean, I think public opinion needs to change. I think there needs to be, someone needs to find a way. America, for foremost. Am I still there? I'm still on. Yeah, I would say public opinion needs to change.
Yeah.
I would say the only thing politicians or people in power, not politicians, even if it's a dictator, people in power fear is public opinion and money. You know what I mean? And how to break. Am I still on? I am on, am I?
Yeah, you are.
I am
You're
on, am
good.
I? Yeah. Is to
Yep,
we
you're good.
need to break that cycle. I mean, not the cycle, but like it needs to. I think the American people need to hold their politicians to account. I think us in the West as well. The EU definitely needs to be held to account as well. And like it needs to stop. Like families can't keep getting bombed. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. You know what I mean? Make it up. Your family's dead.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what's happened. You mentioned about accountability, and I think that is a great concept. But we've talked about this power structure that's been in place forever, and unfortunately, what prevents the politicians are relatively irrelevant. I know that sounds crazy, But if we literally tomorrow morning just everybody goes home, we got brand new people in positions, and we had all good people, they would struggle because the system that allows them to get reelected doesn't allow them to look out for the interest of the country per se or the constituents. They have to play within the system that's set up to basically
Well,
benefit
that's
the
the system.
oligarchy.
That's the system that's constructed by the people. The people construct the
No,
system.
no, it is not.
It
Absolutely
is. It
not.
is. It's public
No,
opinion. The people demand.
no,
That's democracy is the people
no.
demand accountability for the representatives, and that's the way it should be.
That's the way it's supposed to work. That's not the way it's
Well,
happening.
that is the way it works. Well, that's the way it works here. I mean, our system isn't great, but we hold our politicians to account.
Yeah,
We do.
right.
In Ireland, we do. And Biden's supposed to
Yeah.
be from Mayo. You know what I mean? I'll disown him now after this. I loved him before, but after this, he's no Irish American. You can fuck off with his Irishness. But we
Well,
hold our politicians to account.
Ireland has a more democratic system than the United States. It's got more
Because
democracy.
the people made it so. Us as a people hold our
No
politicians
doubt.
to account.
Well, the thing is, you mentioned about account. Let's talk about that for a second. So you mentioned the people should hold them to account. And let me tell you what the people are doing who care about this issue. They're boycotting products. They're going to their actual offices of their elected officials and standing in protest, and they're banging on their door. They're yelling up in the hallways. They're calling them constantly. They're trying to beg them to stop for a ceasefire. They're going out and protesting in hundreds of thousands at a time. And guess what's happening? Nothing.
Because
What
it's
else
not
would you
enough.
ask?
It's not
What else
enough.
would you so in your mind, if they're not, what else would you have them do to hold them accountable is my question for you.
I would hold them account. Don't elect them again. Get someone else.
I just told you that.
I vote for you. I vote for you,
I,
Chip. You
I
get
just,
on a platform.
but I just told you though that if I go in or if John Smith goes in or Jane Doe, it doesn't matter because they get stuck in the same bad power structure. How do we get past that? The people, have you ever seen a thing called marionettes? Have you ever seen one of those performances?
No, I haven't. No, to be honest, I
Okay,
haven't. No,
but you know what it is. You know what it is, all right?
no, I don't know what it is. No.
Okay, so marionettes it's a presentation on a little stage. You have these smaller characters are made out of they're like dolls that are made by an artist, and they have these metal wires coming from them, and it's like a play, but the people talking are like ventriloquists. They talk through the dolls, and the dolls perform on stage for the people, and that's like the entertainment. It's a little like a stage production on a little stage with these little dolls, and they hang from these metal wires, and somebody up top who's got these little controllers control the dolls, and they talk, and it's like a way of people show. It's like a little, like having a play, basically. It's like a theater thing. And the dolls that are hanging from the wires are the politicians, the actual people who are talking to the public and supposed to be representing us, the people. But the people that are pulling them and playing with them and making them move are the people in the oligarchy and the national security state. They control the dolls. So it doesn't matter if you take a doll and disconnect it from the wire and put a new doll up that's got a different color shirt. The same people are dangling the wires and making that doll move. You got to get to the people that are holding the marionettes.
But that's been changed 100 times over history. You know what I mean? Look at the czars in Russia, whatever else. I mean, that's
Yeah.
where you need to make the change. Someone needs to make the change because what's going on isn't right, and it
Well,
is U.S. money that is funding the sport, and that's a fact. We all
I
know
agree.
it. Everyone knows it. The dog on the street knows it. And EU as well. The EU aren't not, but it's mainly US money that is fucking
Yeah.
funding the sport, and that is a fact. Do you know what I mean? And people need to get organized. We need to get organized. And this needs to stop. And I tell you, no matter who is dictating the dolls, people in power are always afraid of public opinion. It's public opinion that makes things change, really. When people's lives are happy, when people are happy, people are happy. The people in power are grand. But I'm not happy right now with what's going on. I don't know about you. I'm not fucking happy. I can't, like I said, I'm comfortable enough in my life, but I can't sit watching the telly looking at people getting bombed and murdered. And families, normal families like me, my family.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's awful. It's beyond reprehensible. I can't stand it. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I've looked at this system for a long time and I've talked about it at length. I don't know if this is the first time you've seen me talk, but that power structure is the problem. And imagine this example. So let's say you have some quicksand and it's very muddy. It's very dirty quicksand. So if you were to get into it with a white clothing, you'd be dark brown. So anybody who comes into the pit, which is what I call Congress and the Senate, quicksand. So if you're wearing a light blue colored uniform,
Chip, I don't like problems. Solutions are better. Let's get solutions. How do we break the fucking problem? Do you know what I mean? There's no point in telling me the problem I'm getting sucked into. How we fix it?
Let me
Talk.
let me do this. Let me do this. One thing I don't like, just to let you know as a host, is interruptions. So I'm just going to talk for a second. I'm going to leave you muted since you seem to like to interrupt. And I want to hear what you have to say, but I don't want you talking over me. So what I was trying to say, you want to talk about solutions? I can get to that. The reason I'm telling you this one thing is these are the obstacles to solving it through voting. You say the people should hold the politicians accountable. I'm telling you why voting for one or the other won't change the dynamics you want changed. It's like a pit. And if you're wearing a light red uniform, Republican, light blue, Democrat, you go into the pit and you get dirty. It's unavoidable. That's the power structure that controls. The party system controls everybody who comes into it. You either play within it and do what you can on the side, or you leave because they force you out, because the money is so prevalent and they control you. That's the problem. So what is the solution? The power structure that's holding on to this problem, the national security, the permanently embedded people, the oligarchy, the titans of business, as well as the special interest groups like AIPAC and others that are usually industry driven, that's where the power lies right now. The people didn't vote for that. That has emerged as a part of the metamorphosis of the American experience. And it's been a slow but steady takeover. Some people have called it a slow motion coup d'etat, corporate coup d'etat. And now you have this oligarchy, the people holding those marionettes, and you can't get to them. They're on a pedestal that's 17 miles high above Mount Everest. How do you do that? You got to climb Mount Everest, figuratively. So you ask what that is, it's very simple. It's going to have to be something that forces them to change. Just like a labor union withholds its labor and forces the company to the table to bargain. Something like that has to pressure those systems. Otherwise, they ignore you. You're saying, why don't people change it? Why don't they hold them accountable? What would you have people do? You say they're afraid of the people. Why would they be right now? They have them fighting with each other left and right, watching MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. They're all bitching about stuff. One person thinks Trump's the answer. The other person thinks the Democrats vote blue no matter who. And they go about fighting and wondering why things don't get better. If I was in charge right now, I'd be the happy as can be. You get tax breaks, you get subsidies, you're making money off the wars. Everything's doing stock markets at all-time highs. Life is good if you're rich right now. If you're the average person, you have inflation, you have your dollar degrading, you can't even afford to buy a car, you can't afford to pay your rent. Your future looks bleak. You can't get a good job. They're laying off people and replacing people with AI and automation. It's going the wrong way for the average person. And the average politician has their hands tied. They're not bad people. They go into a horrible system. You're saying that if people just get together, they're going to organize and change it. How? Right? We can't get people to agree on what to order for lunch or what show to watch on Netflix. All we're doing is fighting and squabbling. I've talked about this at length of what would need to happen. You want to talk about solutions? Let's talk solutions. I have a thing on my link tree called Action for Change. Action, the number 4, change. It's a conversation around exactly what we're talking about. It is a huge hill to climb, though. For you to cavalierly say that people just have to do it, how? Do you know the kind of organizing that has to take place? And you have to get people to be aware first of what the plight is. Most people don't even know what the plight is. They don't even know who the problem comes from. Some do. But most don't. They still believe in the civics. Do your civic duty. Go vote. Change out the people. It's got to get better. No, it doesn't. Some things are changed by voting, like maybe some social issues and some other legislative stuff with money. But all these big picture issues about control and industry and foreign policy don't change, ever. They get worse. So then the question is, what do you do? How do you get past that? You have to have a way to bypass. The system in which these problems were created is not going to solve the same problems that they created because they have a lock on the very same system. So I'll ask you, Truth and Justice from Ireland. You're now in charge. Tell us what we're doing.
Hello? Hello?
Yep.
Am I here? Yeah, I'm
Yep.
here. Yeah. Jeez, you have me bamboozled with all that. Yeah, so you were talking about getting organised. Do you think that's the best road?
Well, I mentioned to you the obstacles that are there. The solution that I think is going to have to happen that's going to make a change. There's 3 or 4 things that people have that the corporations and the power structure doesn't. Sheer numbers. There's a hell of a lot more of quote unquote us, the working class.
Public opinion, yeah.
Well, don't worry about public opinion. Doesn't mean jack shit. Just so you know, you keep saying public opinion. Our leaders are not afraid of public opinion. 75 to 80% of America wants more, this control. And it doesn't happen. That's public opinion. 80% of the public wants something. It doesn't happen because of industry, special interest lobbying and money. Okay? So public opinion doesn't mean anything. If public opinion is congruent with corporate power, it happens. If it's against it, it doesn't. So I'm just telling you, I've lived here my whole life.
No, yeah, I'm listening to you. Yeah, I'm listening to you. So it's money. It's money. Money makes things happen.
It's all about money and power. So
money makes things happen, yeah.
Well, if you're a rich person right now and you're making $10 million a week running your business privately, or let's say you're a corporation and you're going to make $80 million a year if your stock does better, right? But you have to have sales and consumption for that to occur, right? The flow of commerce. So the only thing you see are the numbers on the balance sheet. That is your religion. That's the religion of America, is accrual of capital and return on investment for the wealthy. That's it. And minimizing taxes so they can have more. And they don't care what happens to anybody. I call them the sociopathic serial accumulator class. They don't give a shit. They make more money, they're happy. Anything else can go F off. That's it. That's the system. And they use war and disrupting governments and economic strangling to get whatever they want. It's a very insidious version of empire, but that's what it is. So how do you unwind that or attack that? I call voting throwing a pebble against a brick wall. And you're just going to keep doing it and keep doing, nothing's going to happen. You have to have like a bulldozer or a massive sledgehammer or some kind of big slingshot to even have a chance to put a dent in the wall, right? Well, that's where the organizing thing comes in. So what do people have? We got sheer numbers, right? But if they're not used in mass, it doesn't matter. It's insignificant. 500,000 people at the National Mall for a protest, it's great. It makes us feel good. They don't give it, it's public opinion. Who cares? It doesn't affect them. Now, what does affect them? Voting doesn't affect them. They pick the people they want. We pick one, they're good. Pick the other one, they're good. Third party never wins, right? So they just write a third check if that was the case. So to get around that, you have to do something else. Just like in a company, you have a labor union, right? You organize the workers, and the power structure is the investors and the management. Makes sense, right? Well, just take that same thought process and put it into the same sphere that I just talked about. You got the power structure, which are all those elements I mentioned, and then you have the people, the workers. Well, what do they do in a strike? They withhold their labor. It's necessary for that flow of commerce. So that $10 million a month or week that was coming in isn't coming in. Shareholders get edgy. Customers get pissed. They're not getting their goods or services. The shareholders are losing money. They start to say, hey, management, fix this shit. So now they have to figure out a way to broker a deal that works for everybody. It's forced negotiation. Same thing's going to have to happen here, in my opinion. Now, I will tell you this, the people that hold that power, they're not as nice as the people that run the company. One company is going to deal with it. This massive power structure is going to push back hard. We've seen examples of that historically. John Kennedy tried his best to push back against some of the internal state apparatus. His fate was pretty unpleasant, right? Anybody who's tried to really, really, push back is basically left in a different dimension, unfortunately. So the pushback is going to be great for any effort in these directions. I'm not even saying it's going to happen or will. This is why I don't believe it's going to happen. First of all, it's difficult. But second of all, people are in a lane in this country politically and mentally. And it takes a lot of work to get somebody out of their lane, and they're taking risk. Just like when you go on strike, you don't have your normal money coming in because you lose your paycheck. What do? There's you got your mortgage, you got your kids, you got your family. There's a lot to worry about, right? It's reasonable. So what would cause you to walk away from that and take a risk? Well, maybe you're going to get better pay. And in the meantime, the fund for the union helps you out so you're not destitute and out of your house. Well, the same thing's going to happen here. People to take that risk are going to have some assurances that their whole life isn't going to fall apart and they're not going to go to jail or die, right? So it's a lot of organizing, but on a much broader scale. And by the way, it's illegal in this country to general strike for a number of different industries to go strike on once. It's against the law for this very reason. They know it's going to be effective. So if people do decide to do it, they're breaking the law. So if enough people do it, if 1,000 people do it, they're going to get arrested. If 10,000 people do it, they're going to get arrested. If 1 million people do it, they'll have some trouble. If 30 million people do it, there's no way to arrest your way out of it. There's not enough space in jail. They have to build camps and have way more law. It's going to be a tough situation. So the idea is it's got to be scale driven, but decentralized. So there's not like one or two people that are like the leaders. And you have a common set of escalatory steps, including striking, maybe occupying streets, bridges, roads, tunnels, whatever, blocking that flow of commerce. And that's the only thing that's going to get people's attention. And that might not even work. But getting people to do those things and to conceptualize what that requires is the difficult part. Just like if you tell somebody you're going to have to pay 10% of your paycheck for life to be a part of the union, some people say, no, I don't want to give my money up. What's the big deal? But then somebody convinces you this is why you want to do that. The same conversations, they're going to happen that same way, but towards the objectives that we're talking about. I don't think most people are going to go for it because they're given this spoon-fed diet of you have to go vote. Your civic duty is what's going to change this. And most people believe that shit. And they're fighting left and right. So they want to fight left and right. If you come to them and say, we're going to get rid of Trump, they're like, where do I go? But if you say, we got to work against the oligarchy, it's this intangible, ethereal thing they can't really recognize because it's not how they're conditioned to think or behave. That's why it's such an uphill climb. in my opinion. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the only time people will take a risk like that is when they're desperate. So if you get to the point where you're losing your house, you're losing your car, you don't, there's no such thing as healthcare anymore. What are you going to do? You go get involved in something to make your life better. But if your life is okay enough, you have to weigh the risk and reward. And a lot of times, if you don't even know what you're going against, how are you going to make that calculation? That's what I think it's going to be troublesome. And if you disagree with that, tell me where there's a different assessment that I can get my head around, because I'm open to hearing it. And I don't know if Truth is still here. She's got a little timeout going on. And I would much rather, by the way, if voting would work for what it does, it would be great if we could get different people in power that could change these things. I do believe in trying to support good candidates that are outside candidates. I'm supporting one right now. But I'm not naive to think that having 1, 2, even 20 or 50 new candidates is going to tilt the balance of what I just described. It's going to have to be something more pervasive. And I could be wrong. I would be so happy to be wrong if we could change this country into a better direction to serve the vast majority of people instead of the few that are controlling things. So that's my take, and everyone has their take. And mine's a compilation of listening to a lot of other people who I've thought about and listened to, and looking at the landscape and watching what does or doesn't work, what people say they're going to do versus what they do, and the pattern of behavior over the last 40 years of my life that I've been involved in politics. And that's where things stand, in my opinion. So for some reason, you're timing out there, Truth. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I don't know if you all can hear me. The live is like, I don't know, it's like locked up or something like that. So I may have to end it because it's not responding to any of my touches. Okay. I'll tell you what, I can restart the live. I can close TikTok and just it'll restart it. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, give me.
Here.
Okay.
Enough now.
Truth, are you there?
How are you? How's it going? Here.
Okay.
Enough now.
Truth, are you there?
How are you? How's it going? You all right? No, I really I appreciate your take there, Chip. I mean, you're very well said. I'm just really glad I don't live in America, to be honest with you. I really am. Like, I mean, oh my God. I mean,
don't blame you.
shocking.
It's a big.
I mean, it's terrible to think that's where the money is, but it is where the money is. I work for an American company myself. I mean, yeah, I do appreciate your take. And I was just bouncing out there myself. Thanks for having me on, but God bless
Okay.
us. God bless us. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Take care. Thanks. And by the way, in Ireland, if you don't know, they have a much more democratic process, and their politicians are much more. There's much less space between the elected officials and the people in Ireland, which is a good thing. And I think most of the people who do get elected in a lot of foreign governments do work towards their constituency. It's just the American system has gotten so far from that. It's still discussed as if it's civically structured that way, but it's just not. And there's a big pageant that goes on every 2 years or 4 years, that a spectacle of voting, like, hey, which marionette do you want to vote for this time? Which one do you want to choose? What's this marionette's position on this? They go to debates. It sounds great. Guess what? You know what I mean? So yeah, Claire Daly is awesome. If you haven't heard Claire Daly, she speaks at the EU. She's amazing. So is Mick. Anyway, and listen, even talking about this stuff is a little bit, I'm sure the people in power don't want people sort of recognizing these realities, and because it wakes people the F up. And that's the last thing you want. Like George Carlin said, the last thing you want is a well-informed citizenry capable of critical thinking. They don't want that. They don't want that. They want compliant workers. They want you dumbed down and flipping the switches, but not thinking about what's really going on. And therein lies the problem. But, and people have said to me, well, why don't you run, man? You seem pretty... Do you think I would last 10 seconds given what I've just told you? They would not. I am not welcome. It's a big club and I ain't in it, right? And neither are most of us. So you got to remember, just like in the media, they want people who buy into the system. They are already in the mindset of the establishment. They have no reason to question it. So when the stuff comes down from Reuters or the AP and the editorial staff, they just read it and they have no reason to question it. It's like, this is the news. It's got to be the news, because how could there be a conspiracy otherwise, right? That's what they say. But that's the problem. And the goal is to get compliant, non-critical thinkers into positions where the things just move, they keep on going. The status quo continues, right? So I may be talking myself into a lot of problems. I don't know. But who knows? I'm not advocating, by the way. I'm not a leader. I'm not an advocate for any of the things that I'm talking about. I'm just saying, somebody asked me, what theoretically could maybe tilt the balance. I'm guessing something like that might or could, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think what's going to happen, I've talked about this, I think more controls are going to come in to prevent that from happening in the form of things like potentially digital currencies that have a greater effect on control. Maybe things like with the green, somebody talked about the green situation, they may have some controls on that because of carbon and stuff like that. And who knows? I don't know to what extent it's going to go, but it could go to places where it gets pretty tough to do even any of those things we just talked about. We're already seeing beginnings of things happening on these types of forums where certain content is not as welcome. And I think that's the direction it's going to continue in. And I think it's going to become much more narrow than it is now. And it already feels pretty narrow as it is, right? Somebody says, I think that people are underestimating the Biden administration. I would love to have you come up and talk about that, Sans Suchi 24. Not to put you on the spot. I'm just curious what you mean by that. In a good way or a bad way? You think we're underestimating them in terms of their ability to do good things, or underestimating them in terms of how bad they are? I don't know. Okay, we have Raj Vosa 101. Hello?
Hey, Chip.
Hi.
This is Simon. I'm driving and I'm listening to you. I've been following you for some time, and you could not be more right. Everything you're saying, I totally concur. And I believe that it will take more than one generation, probably two generations, and not in our lifetime, to change existing system. Basically, it will take a dying off old breed and old way of thinking and bringing new generation, maybe Gen Z, that will change things in America. America is extremely polarized country, and we are basically taught to be either one side or the other side. Either you're red or blue, or you're Democratic or Republican. So basically,
Yeah.
there is no such a thing as a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh party like in Germany, for example. We're a
Yeah.
two-party society, and it's extremely hard to break through. You said it really, really right. It is so hard to mobilize masses to make a change because everything is so tightly controlled. And I don't see exit strategy or change strategy for us. Yes, we voice our frustration. We, kind of have like-minded people on TikTok, but it's minority still. Most of my coworkers, most of my friends are completely unaware what's going on in the world. They actually have no clue, let alone that most of Americans cannot even find Syria or Israel or any place on the map, because that's not
Yeah.
taught in school. And it's kind of eye-opening that we are raising a generation of people who are just interested in what is the next big show, Netflix, and what Kardashians are doing now. This is
Yeah.
like a main subject. The war in Palestine and genocide. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say this is this is a typical place for empires to be at this stage. We're sort of in what's called late stage empire. I don't know how many more years the U.S. has in a dominant position. If it all depends on conflict. So if we see active conflict, the changes could come much sooner. The ones you were referring to. If we don't have conflict, which we probably will, it could take longer. And I don't think it's going to be two generations. I disagree with that. I think that by one way or the other, the U.S. empire is going to be in a much different place, I think, within the next 15 to 20 years.
Well, what's going on right now geopolitically is that China is getting very dominant, but not even close to where we at as far as military presence. We have bases around the world, and Chinese are trying to establish their footprint.
Yeah.
See somewhere around Philippines, building those islands, and then in Africa, trying to get gold from Africa and resources from Africa. They do starve
Yeah.
for oil, but they got the Russian oil. So, it's a big game for resources. Just look what's happening with Yemen now. How easy it is to attack Yemen just because we want those ships to go through because somebody's making money on it. Somebody's losing money on it because they're not going through. So it's a much bigger game, and we are on such a small level in this game, like almost insignificant. That's how I feel. It's somewhat depressing to me because I don't see a solution. Everything you're suggesting is still be maybe even a scratch on the surface. Like you, I will vote for you, no problem. But how many of you are going to be there? We need the hundreds of you to be in the government in order to make a change. Do we have hundreds of you there?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy to have 100 of me in anywhere. That'd be pretty tough. But secondly, even if 100 of us that are like-minded were in Congress with all the awareness, again, that you get beaten down. Think of it this way. Bernie Sanders, a lifelong U.S. politician with a little bit of left-leaning ideas about socializing, let's say healthcare, and maybe providing free education and Medicare for all, right? He was put down by the party structure. He couldn't penetrate the problem. And he was a creature of the establishment with a little bit of, how can an outsider come through that?
Yeah, I agree. I know, and I actually like some of his politics until recently. But
Well,
having a vote.
yeah, and the previous caller from Ireland said public opinion matters. He had huge public support. Even Joe Rogan, when he interviewed him, said, I love this guy. He's great. And Bernie Sanders got beaten down like a redheaded stepchild.
Yep, definitely. I felt it. So there is no penetration to this system. System is well designed to keep us away.
Yeah, and so the question is, it comes down to what are people willing to do? The first step in any problem, the first thing you have to have is awareness. You have to be aware. So Karl Marx talked about this. He's a very smart guy, and he talked about class consciousness. And right now, the Americans lack class consciousness. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. I also think that just economical situation in the United States by most of the people are being, let's say, less than the middle class today because they live paycheck to paycheck. That's a huge contributor because most of people are thinking about pure survival. How do I pay my mortgage or my rent? How do I,
Right.
make a car payment and put some food on the table? I don't have
Right.
time for politics. I'm busy making money to survive. So there's no free time for anything.
And not only that, just being exhausted emotionally and mentally from all that effort you're putting into just keeping your neck above water, your family pressures, your relationships, trying to get some moment of respite. You mentioned Netflix. People are looking for any avenue to kind of escape from the pain and pressure they're under. And, there's a lot of cancer because the chemicals in the food, and there's a lot of unhealth because people they don't have time to exercise, or they're always driving and sitting. There's a lot of problems. And the fact that people, 30, 40 years ago, you could have one person in the house working and it would pay the bills and you could live an okay life. Now you have to have two people working and credit cards just to stay above board. And even then you're falling more in debt. I hope I didn't mute you, did I? I think you muted yourself because of some noise. Anyway, yeah, this is not great. I mean, please continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I wasn't born and raised in the United States. I came here as a refugee. I talked one time on your show. I'm originally from Bosnia. I survived genocide, 3.5 years surrounded in Sarajevo. My brother was
Wow.
shot. He's in a wheelchair. I lost 2 cousins. I went through everything. I know what PTSD is. I know how is it to live under constant bombardment and snipers and mortars. So I totally sympathize with the Palestinians because I personally went through that. So it touches me really deeply. But people are unaware of what's going on. Really, most of the people are unaware. We are a minority, even though just talking together and socializing through TikTok or other media, I'm realizing that we are such a minority in this country.
Yeah.
That I don't think so. We're going to be able to do any changes. We can voice our opinion, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think you're right.
I really appreciate what you do. You are kind of opening eyes to many people. Lots of people were never engaged in politics. There was no reason for it, and just realizing who owns our government, who's on a payroll, it is a huge eye opener to many, many people who are willing to, understand what's going on. Some just purely ignore it. There are people just ignore what's going on.
Yeah, but again, I think in fairness to the average person, let's face it, okay? Like I said, people are very beaten down. They're very just worn out, and they're tired, and they're frustrated, and they're angry, and they want to do something that's as simple as possible to affect change, right? It makes sense. So if you're told on TV, you got to figure the right person to vote for, and that's your chance to make a change. That's what they're going to do. They're going to do what they think will make a change. The frustration is that no matter who you vote for, because candidates are mostly being controlled by these different interests, even the president, for that matter, has what I call bookends. There's only so much you can really do. And Trump seems to be this savior complex. Like, if this guy just gets back in, everything's going to be great again. Like, that's his slogan, make America great again. It's a misleading slogan, because America still wasn't great for the average working person. It was slightly better under Trump, right? A little bit lower gas prices. By the way, and I talked about this earlier today, the cyclical economics is more based on central bank policy and interest rates than it is on the president's economic policies. There were some regulatory elements that got taken off the books so that corporations could make more money, but it causes that big train derailment that took place in East Palestine was a direct result of that deregulation. So is society better because some companies make more money? I'm going to mute you because there's a lot of noise coming through. I don't know what's going on your connection, but there's a lot of background noise coming through. But think about it. I mean, deregulation sounds great, this crazy liberal, like, choking of business, right? That's how they portray it. No, some regulations are really important. Food regulation, right? Do you want your getting sick from eating your food? Do you want to have chemicals that can be sprayed on everything because the corporations make more money and therefore you get sick and you get cancer? No. Do you want to have trains that supply the goods and stuff going off the tracks and destroying communities by either blowing up or having chemical spills? No. But that's what regulation does, is it protects us from the unexpected like that. But because it's sold as this really arduous thing that screws up the economy, they get rid of it because it makes money for business. And then the public always picks up the cost. Look at Hawaii. Look at what the U.S. handled Hawaii. It's horrific what happened in Hawaii. And now they're keeping everything closed in, and we don't know what they're going to do as far as people getting their land back. And again, it's all about money and power. It just makes me sick, you know. And who are these people that think this way, that play these games? It's really, really crummy, right? So again, I don't think it's going to change. I think it's going to get worse. Not that I'm a Debbie Downer, but I'm usually optimistic. I try to maintain an upward look, but the inertia is all in the same direction. And to deny that and try to have hope, I think hope is our enemy, by the way. I think it's good to want better outcomes, not to give up on trying, but hope is a removal of action, because you sit back and just hope it gets better. And we're gonna have to do some stuff if it's gonna get better, because just like our own lives, like imagine saying, I hope I lose weight, and then just doing the same stuff, right? Not that I'm disparaging people who gain. I've been told not to talk about weight, but it's a very similar thing, because inaction means more of the same, right? So that's the deal. The hard part is, where do you put your energy, right? In a way that's going to have effectiveness. You don't want to take risks and do stupid stuff for nothing, right? You want to have something work out better. But if it's a big hill to climb, you got to get a lot of people, pushing the boulder up the hill. It's going to be tough to convince your neighbor, hey, let's go work on the you're tired from working, let's go work on the ball. Like, nope, I'm watching Netflix, dude. I'm hanging out with my kids. That's kind of how it's going to be. Now, if you can't watch Netflix, you can't hang out with your kids because there's no more power in your house and someone's trying to take your house back from you. Different situation, right? Now that coming home from work thing, or maybe you don't even have work anymore, now you're willing to go grab the rock. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So, but I really listen, I think the powers that be are not stupid. And if you're watching the flow of what's happening, I believe that more things will be brought into bear that will make it increasingly more difficult for some of these things to occur if they were to. That's my best guess. Because I don't think these people are stupid. They've been building getaways, bunkers, stuff in case everything gets crazy. But they've also been looking at, if things don't go crazy, what are the things we need to do to make sure these kind of things don't affect the status quo? And that's the smart thing to do, right? Have a really bad emergency plan and then have a control system so things don't get bad. That's what I would do. And it's working. And it's being done. Listen, everything is frog in the water. You know the story about the frog in the warm water, and you slowly turn the heat up, the frog won't jump out, and eventually the frog gets cooked. And there may even be a lid that somebody's bringing down so you can't get out. Versus the other thing, you jump somebody in that's why things have to be done sequentially. It's the same thing Israel's been doing in Palestine for decades, right? They slowly but surely been grinding away at the land and building more settlements. They're not just going in now they're going in wholesale, but they haven't been, and that's been their plan. It's just to do it slowly enough that nobody can really get too outraged. And look what's happened. They've just been gaining and gaining and gaining. Same kind of thing here. And the economic system is the same way. Everybody's been slowly but steadily slipping into a lower standard of living, and it's just going to keep going that way until something changes. And I think with things like AI coming, and most people who have jobs in like the field where you do writing or legal research, those jobs are gone. A bot can do all that work, write up a brief. Just you put in the instructions and boom, it comes out. So it's going to be tough. Now, the good news is if you're a plumber or if you're an electrician or if you're somebody who you can't be outsourced to China and they can't replace you with an AI, you're going to have work. So I think trade work rather than college makes a hell of a lot of sense, especially things like air conditioning technician. You get paid a lot of money doing that. Truck driver, maybe not so much because only the trucking industry is going to be the long haul and the highways is all going to be automated. Now, what they'll do is they'll transition to a human driver in the more complicated urban environments where the systems of cameras and automated driving won't work as well. You'll have more trouble. But long haul trucking is done, finished, end of story. 10 years from now, there will be very few independent, like human truck drivers. That's
What
a
about
huge.
yeah?
What's that?
What about universal basic income? How you foresee that happening, or is it going to happen at all?
I think it will. I think what will happen is, if I had to guess, is it's part of the pacification process that'll have to be put into place because you can't have people not eating. That creates revolution. So what you do is you create a society where as much as can flow to the top flows, with people having the absolute subsistence necessary not to, go nuts, with enough diversions and tactics to keep the left, right, and the entertainment system going, and a slow slide into a much lower standard of living for most people. That's what I see happening.
Yeah, I almost feel like we're being slowly dehumanized, just like being mostly robotic. Every day it's a grind. You go to work, you come back home, you're tired, you're sitting in traffic, you can't do anything, and it just keeps repeating. It's a vicious circle of life. There's no much of room for joy and freedom because you're preoccupied just trying to meet ends, to end meet. So anyway, I don't
Yeah.
want to take too much time. I'm already long enough here. I want to have somebody else, step in and talk. But I want to thank you very much for your work. You are really a lightning rod for everybody, just to learn more and how everything is. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate that. Yeah, my calling I should have been a college professor or whatever, but I don't know if I would fit. I think institutions still wouldn't like me because I actually went to business school for 3 years part-time at night and getting my MBA. And I'm telling you, a lot of the class, one guy liked me a lot because he's like, I love the way you think. You're always pointing out strength. But most of the teachers hated my guts because I was always bringing up these anti-establishment points and they just wanted to get on with the lecture. I mean, we had an ethics teacher. Oh my God, this lady hated me. So funny. I was always talking about some of these big macro issues and she just didn't want to have any. I would talk about what is the ethics of the US exploiting third world nations and using their labor and leaving behind in pollution and saddling their country with debt. And she would her jaw would just hit the ground like, I don't want to talk about that. It was great. She was talking about, should you take pencils from the company storeroom? And, who gives a shit? Anyway, just about those issues, listen, it's a pickle. And some things, this is the other thing to remember. Some things are not problems, they're predicaments. And this is a crazy thing to think about. Some things don't have, we talked about solutions. Some things don't have a single answer. There's not like a solution. You can react in certain ways and you can make some minor adjustments, but it may not be something that can be overcome. It may have to destruct under its own weight as it takes its course. That's my best guess, is that either conflict or economic disaster or both, most likely, will lead to the changes in the American structure, not some sort of uprising. But that's my guess. I could be wrong. Hello, how you doing? Is this Louise, I think it said? If the person comes in. Oh, there we go. Hey, Louise.
Hey, how are you doing? I was actually talking to you a couple of weeks back, and I was actually pretty sick. Yeah, it turned into pneumonia.
Oh no, are you doing better now? No?
A little, yeah. But look,
oh wow, that's harsh. Sorry to hear
we're
that.
getting there. Yeah. So I just basically was saying it's crazy, all the corruption, everything. Like we live in Ireland and everything, and just parts of the government, like Sinn Féin, the Greens, the majority of the Greens, the Independents, everything, they're pushing for the heads to, bring Israel to the ICJ, just to make them pay for what they've done. And basically, I was actually only discussing this earlier on with a work colleague, that when Biden had come over here to Ireland, it was last year, and he was welcomed with open arms, and he has family here. They live in Mayo. Yeah.
No, keep talking. I had to
Yeah,
move the camera for 1 sec. Please
that's
keep
okay.
talking.
Okay. And so next of all, he was welcomed with open arms and everything. And the same man, if he came near this country, honest to God, his life would probably wouldn't be worth living because the amount of people that have turned against him and the party in general over there. Like I feel very sorry for normal Americans that have values, that respect human life and that want the best for everybody. But obviously, like in every way, like you've got good and bad, and it's just good versus evil on a daily basis, and we see that like with what's happening in Palestine and different parts of the world, but even in just every country, it's like in different sectors. Like we have a huge homeless crisis here in Ireland. Like it's humongous. It's never been as bad. But we have um guys that are coming in, they're not being like basically like what you have over there with the border control problems, and it's the exact same here. And I've never been racist, like just want to say that. Like I was brought up with staunch, you respect everybody, it doesn't matter the color, the creed, and that. But it makes you question an awful lot of things. And we see the homeless crisis, and then the people, the way that they're being so well looked after. Like, look, I wouldn't begrudge anybody anything, but I just feel like it's the powers that be. It's like we're part of the EU, so they're like, our government is basically saying, oh, it's the EU that's funding us having foreigners here and what have you. And that's not the case at all. Like, it's not the case. And that's what you were saying earlier on about like the way if Trump comes in, or like who's going to win the votes and all that. It's the same here in Ireland, and we've had the same BS for the last like few years. We haven't voted them in. It's like Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and they're just like it's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Like we have not voted these people. Like Sinn Féin, I don't know whether you're aware of Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
And the majority of the voter, like the majority, especially like young people in the country, everybody kind of wants to give them a chance. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
like, it's like it's just corruption. It's just a corruption. It makes me sick. It makes me
Yeah.
so sick. Honestly, it's just I actually can't even stomach even the look of the government's faces. It's like there's only a select few that I'm like, yeah, like I'm sure you're aware of like Claire Daly. She's
Yep.
absolutely
She's amazing.
fantastic. Yes, I absolutely adore her. Like I think she should be running the country if I'm being quite honest. And yeah, it's across the world, it's in every nook and cranny, the corruption in every, like even in the States, say the police force, it's the same here in Ireland. Do you know what I mean? We have
Yep.
actually one of the biggest cartels in the world from Ireland, and they've been getting away with it for years and years and years. And the reason why is because of brown envelopes being passed. See things like that, human trafficking, child trafficking, it's in every single nook and cranny around the world. And it's just, I think if you were to really sit down and think, it just it would literally melt your head like it really,
Yeah. It's
really
horrible.
would. It's so hard to kind of, I don't
It's
know,
terrible.
yeah. And I'd always try and say like, oh, look at the good in people, and always try and find the positives and things. But I do genuinely feel the last while it's just been that bit harder because the governments, as you know, around the world, they want to have us, like you said, like a frog in the pot. And it's like
Hmm.
slowly simmer the frog and then bring it up to a steady boil until the frog literally can't take anymore. And that is exactly what is happening. And it's also like a form of control, but I actually think that for years, these people thought that we were the gobshites. Like, sorry, but they really did. But yet we're so self-educated now. We're able to look into things more in depth. We're able to see stuff for what's really is, and it's just absolutely unbelievable the levels of depravity in the world. And like that,
Yeah.
it's just like normal people like you and I and your listeners, people that interact with you. Like, we're decent people, we're good people. Like, Jesus, we wouldn't go out and intentionally harm anybody or a fly, like, you know what I mean? But these
Yeah.
people are just so, oh, unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. And it infuriates me. I have a daughter who is autistic, and I'm a single parent, and I work and all of that. And by the time you've got your bills done, oh, I love your cat. Oh, he said hello. um, my cat is, well, kitten is here beside me too. But yeah, it's just like, I think the harder you work, you would wonder, like, and just say, I probably sound like I'm waffling a little bit now, but I just wanted to touch on what you said about, like, the frog, and like, it's so true. It's so true. Like, we had like thousands of people that are taken to the streets every single week in town. Like, honestly, thousands upon thousands of people are
Yeah, I heard that.
joining and marching every single weekend without fail for the beautiful people of Palestine, and just for justice, and they deserve it, and they deserve every bit of goodness that's in this world. They deserve it. And
Yeah, I agree.
I've never been a religious person, but I do pray for them. And
Yeah,
it's
I
like
think a lot of
a,
us are doing that. Yeah, I was thinking last night just how awful it must be for just all the people that are in, they've lost their home, all their
everything.
belongings, everything. And all the weather and all the food problems and the water, just
Yeah,
all of it. It's just horrible. Hey,
it
I
is.
want to say thank you for calling in. I really appreciate it. And thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing your perspective. It's been helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. Take
Louise, take
care.
care. Yeah, somebody in the comments, thank you, by the way, Louise. That was, very heartfelt. I appreciate that. Some in the comments said there never was a Palestine or a state named Palestine. Let me cover that for a second because this is a very oft-repeated claim. So for those who don't know, there's a region or a territory on all historical maps referred to by everybody around the world called Palestine. Palestine is the word used by those who don't have a P in their alphabet. And so that territory has been around for a long time. Now, it didn't have formal boundaries as a formal nation state, but most places didn't up until recent history. There are very few places that had formal boundaries. There was regions and territories, and that's how things were back then. There was clans and different tribes and different people and different kingdoms and different things, but they didn't have nation state boundaries like we have today. So to negate the existence of, quote, Palestine by saying it didn't have nation state status, by that law, anybody who lived in the territory that's now Israel wasn't, right? So they just happened to be 1940, 48. They became a nation state with boundaries, formalized, but it doesn't negate the people of Palestine with the history and culture and the region status. In fact, around the world right now, many, many countries, I don't know the exact number, but you can look it up on Google, recognize Palestine as its own people, its own entity, as if it was recognized as a formal state in terms of, it's acknowledging the existence of the people and their desire for self-determination or autonomy. So I think to say that is a little disingenuous. Now, let me explain one more thing to back that up, and you can go look this up too. I don't like to say a lot of things without a lot of evidence. Golda Meir, if you're somebody who supports Israel, you have to know her name. She was the only female prime minister of Israel. And in an interview in, I think, 1973, she was being interviewed by a British TV interviewer. And during the interview, she made a staunch point. She actually corrected the interviewer who said there was no area called Palestine. She says, no. To the Jordan River, both on the east and the west bank, that was Palestine. I'm from Palestine. From 1921 to 1948, I carried a Palestinian passport. Therefore, I am a Palestinian, is what she said. Now, it was under the British mandate, but the civil administration of the territory was done locally by the residents of Palestine. It was a Palestinian authority that was overseen and managed by the British mandate. Therefore, there was some legitimacy to the region that was referred to by everybody as Palestine. Palestine was then carved up, by no choice of the indigenous residents, arbitrarily based on some boundaries that these different groups decided without without referring to the people who were going to be affected by them. And some people did well by that and others didn't. So if you're one of the ones who didn't, you weren't happy about it. And if you're ones that did, you're very happy about it, right? And I always like to say, I'm for a place for any people who have been historically subjected to mistreatment or oppression or whatever you want to call it, or even the horrible things of the Holocaust, to have a safe place to be. Obviously, I mean, who doesn't want to see people be free from oppression and harm? And the question comes down to, is the establishment of that particular safe place in that particular region and the impacts that it had, is that a fair thing, or is that, is the harm that it caused worth it? Well, maybe if you sit on one side of the border, absolutely, because you feel like you have historical claims and, for other reasons a long time ago. And it's like the chosen people, so to speak, that thought. But if you weren't one of the chosen people, you had to go through a lot of horrific situations, either at the end of a gun, or if people next village down got, unalived and you had to leave, or, maybe you were given instructions to leave for a month or two, and then or 2 weeks and you'd be able to come back, or whatever it may have been. But either way, it was disruptive, right? And horrific, called the catastrophe, the Nakba. So if you look at it from the one side, yeah, a lot of people benefited, right? You had autonomy, you had a state, you had a ethno-state for people who were Jewish they could immigrate into and have a safer existence. I'm all for that. Totally, 110%. I'm just against the impact that had on others who didn't do anything wrong. That's the difference. And there could have been other places it could have been done. I know there's the historical argument about the religion and the historical ties to the kingdom of David and the chosen and all that stuff. I don't identify with anybody's version of that. I think that's a thought process that doesn't have any bearing in reality. It's just a story. But what I would say is there are other places that could have been carved out. The thing is, nobody in those regions were willing to accept that outcome for whatever reasons, anti-Semitism, whatever it may have been. Even the United States, when there were refugees leaving from Europe and came over to try to emigrate, they were turned away. So some of those ships came back to Palestine, and those people came. There's videos of it right now. You can see videos in like 1926 and et cetera. And those people came into Palestine. Go look at a population search. This is a good exercise to do if you're somebody who likes to look up data. It's real simple. Go to Google and type in, or whichever search engine you use, type in population demographics historic Palestine, and you can look at it from 1870 to present. And you can see that in like 1880, the number of people in the indigenous territory who were identified as Jewish versus Arab, which is what they referred to people back then, was like maybe 5% Jew, Palestinian or Arab. And then it changed over time because of the emigration from Europe and elsewhere, because of, people being in pogroms and being persecuted, and they were assimilated into the territories in one way or another as more immigrants. But like any other immigration situation, when you have a lot of people from a different culture and life coming in and changing the dynamics of the demographics, it can be disruptive in some way. Not necessarily because one group hates the other, but because it's just disruptive. You have your people, and then another group comes in, and it gets a little dicey sometimes. Like, what are all these people doing now? I used to have all of my peoples, and now I have a third of somebody else, and we don't. It's an odd. People sit at the same lunch table. You go to college, you go to high school, your group sits together, right? This is how we are. We're sort of group oriented. So over time, that got more dicey because a lot more people emigrated, and it changed the dynamics. As of like 1944, the demographics had shifted dramatically. You look at the tables, you'll see it. So were there skirmishes? Yeah, there was some stuff going on, but the vast majority of the people who got unalive were in different massacres very close to the formation of Israel, because the people that were very fervent supporters decided they were going to do whatever they had to do to make it happen, and therefore they just started kind of wreaking havoc. Go look up David Ben-Gurion and the Irgun, I-R-G-U-N. Just look that up if you think I'm talking trash. This is part of the narrative that, by the way, does not get explained to people as they grow up in Israel. They hear it was a land without a people for a people without a land. That's the story they're given. And it just kind of, this magical thing came about that was this glorious miracle of Israel, a safe place for a homeland for Jews. That's not true. That is completely untrue. But people get that, and they believe that. And they're grown up to be taught that that's what happened, and that the Arabs, the others, are interlopers to their God-given territory. And they even look at Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank, which most people call, as their territory. And they think that because of the 1967 Six-Day War, that they were, quote, under threat, which they weren't. There were military exercises going on in the Sinai. And granted, you can interpret it however you want. You could say that because of those exercises that it was threatening. Okay, but nobody invaded the border. Nobody came across or did anything about it. They said that they had a right of preemptive attack. And so they did. And they moved across. They bombed the Egyptian Air Force. They bombed the Syrian Air Force to disable their air superiority. And then they went and invaded with their army. And they were able to win that combat in the Sinai, as well as up to the edge of the Jordan River, which is where they stopped. And also in the Golan Heights, which is in the northeastern portion of what was Israel. Now they have occupied territory there. It's a strategic high ground that looks down on northern Israel. So that's what happened. And the interpretation of the international community is, hey, dude, after World War II, after we had the mustache man running around taking shit, you can't do that anymore. That was the agreement the world came to. And yet they did. And that's where the formation of international law comes in, but it doesn't have any teeth. That's the problem. And with the UN, the U.S. has always backed what the Israelis have done, and therefore there's no repercussions. That's been the problem. And it continues to be the problem. Like we saw with the ceasefire request earlier, U.S. vetoes it, right? But again, we talked about the power structure. So to overcome this issue, it's wound up in that same power structure we talked about. So the same heavy lifting and hard climb on Mount Everest is the same thing that blocks this issue as well as all the others. So therefore, it's very difficult to change. So I don't have an answer about a solution as far as 1 or 2 states and how to break that. I don't have an answer for you. I don't think there is an easy answer. I think it's going to have to play out in certain ways. Conflict could change it dramatically, right? And I think that may be one of the driving factors that changes the dynamics. You never know. Conflict causes crazy things to happen. Or it could have to happen through internal strife, could be, although I doubt that. And most likely what I think is going to happen is there'll be some conflict, but most likely the American system is going to fall in its own weight, over leverage on debt, financial problems, the internal systems in the country just breaking down because of the poverty. It's going to be bad, man. And I think America in 2070, 47 years from now, 47 years from now, is going to be a totally different place. You wouldn't even believe it if you saw it. So much so that, and listen, I'm not some soothsayer, but I decided not to have kids because of the ecological and economic things I thought might happen in the later years of my life, which are pretty much coming to bear. Not that I'm happy about it. And I'm glad I didn't have kids, because I think the life at my age, my kids 25 years from now, if they were 25 years old or whatever, they're going to be in a much different life. I call it the meat grinder. And I think people in America are headed into a massive meat grinder. I hate to say it. I hope I'm wrong. I lucked out by that. I just made the choice, and everything's got pros and cons, right? So yeah, it sucks. I mean, I would much rather paint a rosy future. There are people like Patrick Bet-David who says the future's bright. And maybe it is. Maybe I'm seeing it wrong. Maybe if you have $350 to $500 million, the future looks okay, because you can do things to outmaneuver some of these problems. You're not being hurt by them as much, right? So if inflation causes half the value of your money to go down, you still have what? $180 million? Not a bad deal, right? But if you're making 40 or 50 grand a year and you go down to 25, much different deal, right? No, I've never been married, Clifford LaChain Violet. Nope, no marriage, no kids, none of that stuff. I don't even have a girlfriend. I'm not gay. I had no boyfriend, no girlfriend. No, it's okay to ask. I don't mind. It's what it is. And not that I wouldn't like to, but just I got to go out more. I don't feel well most of the time. That's the problem. But I don't see anybody in the guest queue. It's about dinner time for me. If anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Somebody says they have 3 kids, best choice of their life. Right on. Right on. I know people who have kids love their kids. It's funny. People who are against humans growing, they call people who have kids natalist, N-A-T-A-L-I-S-T, like people who are birth children. And there is a big movement, by the way. They're anti-natalists, which means they don't believe in people having kids. They don't believe in the human population growing. What am I making for dinner? I'm going to have this. I'll show you. It's this stuff right here. Yeah, this is going to be backwards. Let me see if I can turn the phone. Let me change my, you'll see it this way. It'll show up this way. So you can see it's this, it's like a spicy chickpea with some rice, and I'm going to make some vegetables, probably some broccoli or something like that. A good vegan meal. Here we go. Yeah, it'll be pretty good. That's the kind of stuff I eat a lot of the time. Or I make up a ton of rice. I basically cook my own rice. I buy 50-pound bags of rice and a lot of potatoes. And I make up like, I make soups, but I add a ton of rice and potatoes. And I make, one of the things I love to make, this is something I like to make the most. I take a bunch of onions and mushrooms and I cook them up in a pan, just straight up. And then I drain it. And then I take potatoes and I microwave them and I smash up the potatoes and then I just cover it with the stuff and I put a bunch of vegetables or salad and just eat that. And that's pretty good stuff. Chickpeas are amazing, garbanzo beans and black beans. You can make so many things with them, and that's a lot of protein. You can mash up the beans. I make a bean dip, which is amazing, which is really good. And I try to eat as much of that stuff as I can. Every once in a while, I eat some sugar, which I know I shouldn't. I just like it too much. But I used to eat ice cream I don't eat ice cream anymore. I'd make a banana version of it. You take frozen bananas and you chop them up, put them in a blender. You add in whatever fruit. I have cherries, dark cherries, and then I add a little bit of cocoa powder and a little bit of unsweetened almond milk. And you mix that up and it makes like this frozen dessert that's amazing. And it has very little calories. So that's the whole key, is trying to get stuff that fill you up, but it has less calories. And then you can't gain weight, but in fact, you will lose any excess body fat you have. It just goes away. It's amazing. And people say, like, I have so many bananas. I always have probably 4 or 5 of these at one time. I eat bananas like crazy. So, and the one thing is, the good thing about bananas is they can't spray the fruit with those chemicals, right? Because it doesn't get in for the most part. Apples and stuff, strawberries, the softer fruits, they're covered in all sorts of pesticides. I have to take my apples and spray them with like whatever it's called, like it just kind of dissolves the outside layer and then clean it off. Because apples are sprayed with this chemical called ALAR, ALAR. Look that one up. Cancer.com. But yeah, and by the way, the most important thing we can do, if you want to know the truth, and this is going to be tough. If things get really bad, it's not going to matter. But as you're learning how to grow some of your own stuff, whether it's vegetables, fruits, if you want to have backyard chickens, hens with eggs, or whatever it is you want to do, finding ways to be self-sustaining with some kind of food is really important. Learn how to can stuff so you can have stuff in stores like stewed tomatoes. You can do fermentation with different foods. And they don't taste as good, right? Because they're fermented, but there's all sorts of YouTube videos on how to do it. Those types of skills are going to be so necessary over time. So if you can find a way to force yourself to do those things or learn about them, that's what's going to have value in society. Things that can be bartered and things that can be done through. Imagine if you went to live in an Amish community right now and they said, okay, you got to go to work. What are you going to do? That's what you got to learn how to do. That's going to be important. Because right now, yeah, you can have seeds too. That's important. But yeah, fermented foods are good for you. This whole idea of going to the store, from living in large communities of densely populated, going to the store. Well, how does this stuff get to the store? It's got to be trucked in from elsewhere. Well, how does it get trucked in? It's got to be pulled off the land, whether it's an animal or plant. It's got to be processed. It's got to be packaged. It's got to be shipped. It's got to be, then it goes from an intermediate warehouse to each store, a lot of trucking. And it's very energy intense, right? I mean, the amount of energy, the amount of fossil fuel that goes into every bite of food we eat, like this thing right here, is amazing, including the very plastic that it's stored in, where everything's oil. And if that ever gets scarce or we get cut off from it, we're screwed. I mean, we're so dependent on fossil fuels. And when they talk about, by the way, I'll close with this. We're almost close to 8 o'clock. I'm going to stop at 8. Fossil fuels, you got to know, if we cannot this really shook me up when I learned this. And this was a big bummer. I used to think, like a lot of people maybe still do, that if we just switched over to renewables, we got to make the move, or we got to do more solar, more wind, more whatever, like maybe even nuclear, right? No. Nope. You can't electrify more than a certain percentage of what we do in industrial. Different practices, you just have to have oil or natural gas. You can't do it any other way. No, I don't eat any seed oils. Somebody asked if I eat seed oil. No. I try not to eat too many processed things. This is about as far as I'll go as far as a processed food. And the ingredients here are very minimal. It's like 5 items, 6 items. If it has palm oil or sunflower oil or hydrogenated oil, no. Like, remember those Tasty Cake snacks? Those things are so chock full of chemicals. It's disgusting, man. But no, the way I like to say it is this, and I get some stuff for the dog, like, treats. But think about it this way. If you were alive 20,000 years ago, what would you eat? Because we evolved over like 250,000 years, right? From our primates to hit whatever we are. And so what did we eat for generation after, for thousands and thousands of years? We ate what the land had to give, right? You ate stuff that was on a tree, you ate stuff that came out of the ground, you ate grasses and roots and whatever you get your hands on, basically, so you didn't starve to death. A lot of vegetables, right? A lot of gatherables, because it's a lot easier to gather something than it is to go try to chase something down, right? And remember, energy returned on energy invested is how we survive. So if you run 5 miles to catch a squirrel, that gives you enough energy to replace 1/5 of what you're on the bad side of the equation. So you got to find ways to eat. That's why agriculture changed everything, because we didn't have to run and chase or find stuff. It was there for us. And then of course you could grow your population because you don't have to spend all your time chasing food or being chased by somebody who wanted to eat you as food, right? That's why the big three are the control of fire, domestication of plants and animals, and discovery of fossil fuels. That's been the human journey. And then of course now we have the techno age, like a microprocessor, right? That's like the big 3 plus 1. And you add all those together and you have this massive growth of human society and technology and stuff. And it's just totally not, I don't believe we were meant to have any of that stuff. I don't believe so. And absent those things, by the way, we live completely sustainably with the environment. And with those things, we fuck it up. Right? So who knows if this was all meant to be. I think George Carlin said it best, and I'll leave it at this. He goes, all this plastic, maybe what our contribution is to the earth is we created the earth plus plastic. And I think that's pretty funny because plastic never goes. You should speak at schools, they wouldn't have me. They would not have me. Remember that schools are an element of the institutional framework of conditioning human beings to work in the jobs. That's it. It's a mechanism to give you a basic bare bones education, but not to think critically like this. As George Carlin said, go online and type in George Carlin on YouTube, type in George Carlin critical thinking, and you'll see this little skit he does about the education system. And he says, if you're not happy with education, don't worry, you're not going to get any better. You're never going to improve. I'll tell you why. And then he goes on the spiel of what I just said. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah, watch George Carlin. I'm telling you, he was spot on with everything he said politically. He was a very, very, very smart guy and funny as hell to go with it. So I usually go live on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 12 noon to 2. Today I went 12 to 4 and then like 5:30 until now. But I've done a lot for today. So these are all recorded, by the way. So you don't know, I just downloaded the other one from today. I then put them up on my YouTube and my Rumble channel. So if you missed any of this, you want to catch up, review it, whatever, you can do that. So this one will be up probably within the hour. And they're all done by date and time of day, part 1, part 2. And then I try to give a little description if I can remember what the hell we talked about. So thanks for everybody being here. By the way, just a couple quick things administration-wise. So my schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8 p.m. Eastern to 10 p.m. So I'll be here tomorrow night, Friday night from 8 to 10. Sometimes on Fridays, because I have Saturday, I can go a little longer. And then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday from 12 to 2, 12 noon, all Eastern time. So love to have you here. If you can tell other people about me, like when you come to the lives, you can hold the face of the content creator or the screen for a half a second and all of your friends pop up. And then you can just tap invite. That's a good way to bring people in. And then there's another way to do it. There's a little orange heart. And if you tap that, it's like 2 cents. It makes you give a coin for 2 cents. It's really cheap. And then there's this little 3 or 4 things you interact with. That brings a lot of people in. I don't know why. That's TikTok. And then finally, you can tap on the face for hearts. This one did 80,000, which is, for most lives, they probably have 5 times this. I don't usually emphasize. I don't usually bug people to do that because it's a pain in the ass. But if you do come in, if you can make your finger get busy on whomever you like, it helps bring more people in. Now, I want to cover one more thing. People have accused me of doing this for money. Let me tell you this. I could show you right now if I brought it up. I've done 5-hour lives, 7-hour lives, and guess what? I get a thing that says you earn 73 cents. I'm not shitting you. And so if that's doing it for money, I'm the biggest fool that ever lived. So I think in terms of donations, and they have this thing called the Creative Program. I make a lot of videos, and most of them don't even qualify because they're on controversial subjects. But the few that I don't, I've made, I think, $137 in almost 4 months. That's not what I would call great pay. So I think between donations from people like you and that have been very kind to help, and the creative program that I just mentioned, and the lives, I think I've made $800 or so in 4.5 months. So if I'm doing that for the money, I'm a moron. So, and anyway, I'm totally transparent about all my financial stuff because I really don't give a shit about that anymore. It doesn't matter to me. I just like anybody else, you have to survive, right? So I would love to do this full time. I'm doing some trading, which is, interesting. It's an up and down thing. Sometimes you lose some, like today I lost a little bit of money. But some days the goal is to make a little more. But anyway, the bottom line is, if you want to support me, if you like independent content creators, this is the way the new world has to work. Everyone's going to have to support whomever you like, because if you don't, they die off. It's like a flower. You got to keep it in the vase of water. And the water are the small donations. So with that in mind, on my link in my bio, I have a thing that says Linktree Chip Barnes. If you're in the United States, it's clickable. If you're not in the US, you're not going to see the clickable link. You'll see it written out in my bio. So if you're outside the US and you want to help, you go to a web browser and you just type in the Linktree Chip Barnes thing, and it'll take you to the same place. Once you're there, my normal social media links are there, so you can find the YouTube and Rumble. Rumble's just another version of YouTube. You can click your way through and follow me and watch the videos. Or if you want to join my Patreon, which I'd really appreciate, it's towards the bottom. For $5 a month, I do about 25 or 30 hours a week of this stuff. Or I'm sorry, yeah, about 15 hours a week of this, and about 60 hours, 80 hours a month altogether. So for $5, that's not bad to tune into all that program, less than a cable bill, right? So if you want to help out with that, great. I also have regular donation links. Like, and I don't mean to be a telethon guy. I'm just telling you what it is. I got Venmo, Cash App, whatever you can think of, I got it pretty much. So if you want to help out, great. If you don't have the means, please don't. I don't want anybody giving me money you don't have. But my hope is eventually, if I can get this going, is to have enough to cover my monthly bills, which is about $2,600. I live very lean and mean, which is fine. I enjoy that. But right now I'm not covering that, so I'm going to have to figure something out, because your savings start to dwindle. You're like, damn. So that's it. That's me in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking to everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the guests that came on, and thanks for all the comments and questions. If I missed your comment or question, I apologize. Sometimes I get into conversations, I can't see it all, but I will get to it if you come back. Tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern, I will be here, and now I'm going to go eat some food because I'm hungry, and hopefully I can get some sleep, so I'm good for tomorrow night. So good to see everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for being here.